Chapter 51, War. In the year 1250 of the starlight calendar, at the beginning of the month of winter harp. Not long after the new year, Flashing City accused Blackstone City's lord, Kyi of colluding with the Starfire Church, demanding that he come to Flashing City to confess and accept punishment. After Kyi refused, they brazenly mobilized troops to attack Blackstone City. Crack! Crack! The sound of metal armor clanking echoed. Kyi climbed the city wall, taking a brass telescope from Braid and scanning the distance. Under the night sky, the entire plain outside the city was dotted with the glow of campfires. Shadows flitted around the campfires, and dense rows of tents spread across the plain. Owen has truly committed everything this time. It's not just his troops, the armies of the traders Devon, Zolf and Norwood are also involved, and on top of that, they've recruited over 1,000 mercenaries. Braid observed the enemy forces with a heavy expression. Owen's contingent alone numbered nearly 4,000, and with the mercenaries, their total exceeded 5,000. Almost 4 times that of Blackstone City, making this war a daunting challenge. Mercenaries are not a significant concern. Those undisciplined folks are merely a mob. They might hold some value in a direct confrontation on the plains, but their impact will diminish in a siege, Kyi replied, lowering the brass telescope. Yet, the slight furrow of his brow revealed he wasn't as calm as he pretended. Though he had anticipated that Owen would tear off the facade of diplomacy following the failed assassination, the reality of the situation still bore down heavily on him. Seeing the dense army outside only added to the weight on his shoulders. Blackstone City had been expanding its military resources recently but could barely muster around 1,300 soldiers. Of those, 300 were minimally trained militia who had never seen battle. How much they could contribute on the battlefield was uncertain. Among the remaining 1,800 were city guards, whose combat effectiveness was reasonably decent. The other 200 belonged to the Blackstone Cavalry, Kyi's true ace. It's a shame about the timing. If I had another year or two, I could turn the Blackstone Cavalry into a true knightly army. Even with just 200 to 300 knights, we could easily sweep through the entire Flashing territory. Kyi sighed inwardly. Training a single Blackstone Cavalry member cost around 50 gold coins. Even with the Blackstone mine as a financial resource, the expansion of the Blackstone Cavalry had been painfully slow. They had only reached 200 members so far. Have the personnel from the Blackstone mine returned? Kyi turned to ask. Jotun nodded. They have all returned safely. According to scouts, the enemy has now occupied that area. Kyi nodded slightly, contemplating the enemy forces ahead as he strategized for the upcoming battle. For them, defending the city would provide a strategic advantage. Owen's elite cavalry was better suited for open field combat, their effectiveness would be significantly reduced in a siege. After all, horses couldn't fight on the walls. In contrast, the Blackstone Panthers were perfectly capable of defending the city. In fact, the reckless puppets could display even greater combat prowess in a siege. This trade-off would benefit Blackstone City. However, merely defending was not enough. If the war dragged on too long, resupply would become a critical weakness. Moreover, with the Blackstone mine in enemy hands, Kyi didn't want it to turn into a financial resource for them. The best course of action was to hold the city for a while, wearing down the enemy's strength. Once they grew complacent, he could then deploy the Blackstone Cavalry to strike directly at the heart of the enemy camp. If they could eliminate the enemy's command structure, the war would be theirs to win. Since its formation, the Blackstone Cavalry's details had been tightly controlled. Outsiders knew nothing of how powerful this force had become. The rebels were entirely unprepared, making the chances of a successful plan high. With thoughts racing in his mind, Kyi quickly devised a plan. Turning around, he saw the gathered officers' serious expressions. Kyi spoke confidently, the enemy is formidable, but we are no pushovers. We have worked hard over the past 2 years to build our strength for this very moment. Let's show those traitors what Blackstone City is truly capable of. Indeed. You are right, my lord. Let those traitors see the might of Blackstone City. I can't wait to get started. Under Kyi's encouragement, the officers quickly rallied their spirits. Braid and Jotun exchanged glances, both smiling. Outsiders might not understand the nuances, but as members of Blackstone City, they knew just how dramatic the changes had been over the past 2 years. In terms of knights alone, Blackstone City had over 160 members. Many baronies didn't even have that many knights. Not to mention Blackstone City had 200 cavalry-level Blackstone Panthers. Counting all of that, the total knight-level combat power exceeded 300. To be honest, if it weren't for Blackstone City being constrained by its limited territory and lacking foundational military strength. Aside from the Blackstone cavalry, they had no other elite forces. Owen would hardly be a match for them. All of this was thanks to Sir Ang. I wonder where Sir Ang is now? Jotun said, patting the long sword at his waist with a grin. If Sir Ang were here, we wouldn't even need to defend the city, we'd just charge out and take those bastards down. Many knights nodded in agreement. Even the usually stoic Braid couldn't help but show his enthusiasm. Under normal circumstances, they wouldn't believe that a single person could sway the outcome of a war involving 5,000 to 6,000 people. But Sunan was different. They had witnessed the incredible and unfathomable powers of a wizard, and as a result, they held immense confidence. If it were him, perhaps he could indeed create miracles that left everyone speechless. Not lingering too long, Kyi observed the situation from the city wall for a while before turning away. The preparations for war were intricate, and there were many tasks awaiting his attention. The next day, not long after dawn, the sound of a low, resonant horn echoed from outside the city. Kyi and his officers climbed the city wall, gazing out to see the enemy forces beginning to array themselves in formation. Before long, thousands of soldiers pushed siege equipment toward the city walls at a slow but steady pace. They're truly eager, Kyi thought, a cold glint in his eyes. He raised his hand and commanded in a deep voice, "Prepare for battle." "Yes, my lord." The officers responded in unison, swiftly turning to instruct the soldiers to prepare for combat. The defending forces sprang into action. Chapter 52, I truly can't think of a reason to lose. Kill. The deafening roar of battle cries and screams echoed above the city walls. Countless siege ladders were propped against the walls, and waves of mercenaries and soldiers swarmed up. From a distance, the walls looked like they were crawling with ants. On the Starlight continent, where knights reigned supreme, the defensive capabilities of tall city walls were not particularly impressive. Even apprentice knights could force their way up the walls under a rain of arrows and falling stones. As for true knights, a mere height of several dozen meters was no obstacle, a few powerful jumps would suffice. Thus, city walls often became critical points of fierce contention during battles. Within half an hour after the war had broken out, the walls had transformed into a bloody meat grinder, with blood spilling through the cracks of the stone bricks, quickly soaking the ground. At the rear of the battlefield, in the center, heavily guarded, 4 armored knights coldly observed the carnage unfolding on the walls. Devon furrowed his brow and said, "The resistance from Blackstone City is surprisingly strong." "That's to be expected," the tall Zolf replied in a deep voice. "In the end, expanding an army comes down to money. With Kyi controlling the Blackstone mine. Such a treasure. If his military strength had shown no improvement, that would be utterly pathetic." Norwood chuckled. "There's no need to worry, our forces are several times greater than theirs. There's no way we can lose." With that, he turned to the man beside him, flashing a smile of ingratiation. "Besides, we have Lord Mathil here, with you leading the charge, defeating Blackstone City will be a piece of cake." Mathil, a rugged-looking man in his 40s, was one of the new lords appointed by Owen after taking control of Flashing territory, and he was also one of Owen's confidants. Mathil was also a senior knight. This time, under Owen's orders, he had come to lead troops into battle, eager to make a name for himself and secure more land. Hearing Norwood's words, a look of pride crossed Mathil's face as he chuckled, "Lord Norwood is right, with a numerical advantage like this, I truly can't think of a reason we might lose." Devon, being the more seasoned, couldn't help but remind them, "Don't forget that there's a wizard in Blackstone City." "Are you talking about Sunan?" Norwood scoffed. "That kid has grown up before our eyes, he was weak and timid as a child, and his body couldn't even handle basic breathing techniques. How could such a useless person possibly be a wizard? Moreover, whether the rumors about him being a wizard are true is still uncertain." Mathil also appeared unconcerned. Even if he were a real wizard, a senior knight like himself wouldn't be afraid. Devon harbored some doubts about the rumors himself, but seeing the two of them so dismissive, he chose not to press the matter and returned his attention to the distant battle. The first wave of attackers comprised mercenaries and soldiers brought in by the 3 lords, and their combat effectiveness was far from stellar. As a result, their forces hadn't yet managed to take the walls, and the fierce tug of war continued. In fact, due to the prolonged assault, their offensive had begun to show signs of fatigue. Seeing this, Mathil could no longer restrain himself and led the elite troops from Flashing territory into the fray. With Mathil's forces joining the battle, the pressure on the defending side increased dramatically. In just a short while, the area of the wall occupied by the attacking forces expanded further. Mathil, displaying fearless bravery, carved a bloody path through the defenders, causing their lines to waver. From afar, Devon and the others observed this scene through their brass telescope, their expressions lighting up. Indeed, Lord Mathil is formidable. This is the power of a senior knight. But just as they reveled in their excitement, the situation on the walls suddenly changed. A group of panther-like creatures suddenly charged up the walls, viciously attacking the siege forces. These beasts were unexpectedly powerful, able to engage knights in fierce combat, causing the momentum of the siege forces to stall. Meanwhile, Kyi appeared on the wall, alongside a black stone panther, blocking Mathil's advance. Though Kyi was only a junior knight and lacked Mathil's strength, he had a fierce black stone panther beside him, a knight-level creature that fought fearlessly. The synergy between man and beast was seamless, making it difficult for Mathil to overpower them. "What are those things?" Norwood exclaimed in shock. Devon and Zolf also wore expressions of disbelief. Coming back to reality, Devon hesitated. "Those look like the mounts of the Blackstone cavalry." "Mounts?" Norwood and Zolf exchanged incredulous glances. They knew that Blackstone City had formed a cavalry unit, rumored to have some peculiar panther-like mounts. At the time, they had scoffed at the idea and hadn't given it much thought. While many exotic beasts were indeed stronger than war horses, strength didn't mean they were suitable for the battlefield. For cavalry, the more important factor was the level of training and obedience to their riders' commands. Only then could the mounts and riders combine their strengths effectively. However, large-scale training of such beasts that could adapt to the battlefield was extremely rare. Devon and the others had initially dismissed Blackstone City's claims as mere showmanship. But now, seeing it firsthand, they were astonished to find that the Panthers displayed coordinated movements and fierce combat skills, surpassing even the most elite soldiers. They were perfect for the battlefield. If all the mounts of the Blackstone cavalry were like these beasts, then the combat prowess of that army was truly terrifying. With 200 Blackstone Panthers joining the fray, the previously gained ground by the siege forces was quickly reclaimed. The battle once again fell into a stalemate. "Damn it! Blackstone City has such a trump card hidden." Norwood fumed. Zolf frowned. "This is troubling. With those beasts in play, taking Blackstone City will be far from easy." Devon also wore a furrowed brow. The unexpected variable made it clear that even if they could eventually capture Blackstone City, they would suffer significant losses. Attacking the city will incur heavy losses, surrounding it might be better. After some contemplation, Devon looked at the other two. Winter has just ended, and Blackstone City surely has little food stored. If we surround them for a month or two, they'll undoubtedly run out of resources and have to come out and fight us. Both Zolf and Norwood's eyes lit up, nodding in agreement. "Good idea. When Mathil returns, we should propose just that." In a direct confrontation, the main force would be Mathil's elite cavalry. This way, they could minimize their own casualties. Just as the three were pleased with their clever strategy, a piercing scream suddenly pierced the air. Turning to follow the sound, they were astonished to see chaos erupting on the right flank, where Mathil's elite cavalry was stationed. Hundreds of war horses scattered in panic, their neighing filling the air. Many cavalrymen were thrown from their mounts, trampled into pulp by the stampede. More cavalrymen, while trying to calm their steeds, were flung away as if struck by a charging elephant, crashing over 10 meters and screaming in agony. Some unfortunate souls twisted grotesquely in mid-air, landing without a sound, dead before they hit the ground. Chapter 53, Surrender and Half Must Die. What happened? Devon was both shocked and furious, summoning his aide to demand answers. However, the aide looked just as bewildered. "My lord, I have no idea. Those soldiers just flew out suddenly." "Useless." Devon's expression darkened, and without bothering to scold his aide further, he turned his horse to see for himself. But the next moment, he halted in his tracks. The chaos in the distance was spreading towards them. As he got closer, Devon began to discern some clues. It was as if an invisible giant beast was charging towards them, scattering any soldiers in its path, leaving broken bones and bloody carnage. From a high vantage point, one could clearly see a horrifying trail of blood cut through the previously dense crowd, continuously extending towards where Devon and the others stood. The faces of Devon and his companions turned pale. "Stop it!" Devon nearly roared the command. However, facing an invisible enemy, the soldiers had no way to intercept it. They could only use their flesh and blood to block its path, but in the next second, they were sent flying, some even torn in half, blood splattering everywhere. The gruesome scene amplified the fear on the faces of the surrounding soldiers. After dozens of soldiers had died in vain, the remaining troops finally cracked, screaming in terror as they fled in all directions. "Death to the cowards!" Devon sliced through a soldier fleeing like a headless chicken, barking orders. Unfortunately, this action was futile against soldiers paralyzed by fear. Only a few knights steeled themselves to stand before the three lords. These knights were landholders with villages. If they fled in battle, they would inevitably face punishment and lose their territories. "Damn it! What kind of monster is that?" Norwood's face betrayed his fear. "That's my magical pet." A voice suddenly came from behind. The group turned sharply, realizing someone had appeared behind them without their notice. Seeing the person's face, Norwood's pupils constricted, and he blurted out, "Sunan." He had thought Sunan was still in Blackstone City. How could he possibly cross the battlefield and appear in the heart of their army? How did this guy manage that? Devon and Zolf were also surprised, but after exchanging glances, they quickly made a decision, drawing their weapons with a clang. "Kill him!" The surrounding knights surged forward, filled with murderous intent as they charged at Sunan. Compared to the terrifying invisible beast, it was clear that a visible enemy was easier to deal with. However, they soon realized how wrong they were. A blinding flash of lightning erupted in their field of vision, the dazzling light causing the knights to instinctively shut their eyes. And once they closed their eyes, they could never open them again. Intense pain washed over them in the next instant, darkness engulfing their consciousness. Devon and the others could only watch in shock as Sunan waved his hand, unleashing a torrent of lightning that snaked through the air, shooting out in all directions. In just a moment, over 10 knights were turned to ash, lifeless on the ground. Devon and the others stood in a daze, their minds blank, mouths agape, unable to speak. What kind of power was this? Over 10 knights, including several high-ranking ones, had been killed in an instant. Their faces turned pale as they looked at Sunan, terror and disbelief evident in their eyes. It was only at this moment they realized that the rumors about Sunan were true. Whether it was the legendary power of wizards or that Sunan had become a wizard, the reality of these claims was powerfully confirmed in that instant. Seeing Sunan's indifferent gaze, Zolf suddenly jolted back to reality and shouted, "Wait, I surrender. As long as you don't kill me, I can arrange for my family to pay a huge ransom." Zolf spoke quickly, fearing that if he took too long, Sunan would strike. Devon and Norwood soon followed suit, echoing the same sentiment. Not to mention the unfathomable Sunan, even that invisible beast was a terrifying weapon of war on the battlefield. No matter how elite the army, facing such a monster would lead to collapse. They even doubted whether Mathil could handle Sunan and the beast. Above all, the most important thing now was to save their own lives. "Surrender." Sunan chuckled derisively, nodding. "Fine, surrender and half must die." Upon hearing the first part of the sentence, Devon and the others felt a glimmer of hope, but quickly froze in confusion. What did half must die mean? Before they could comprehend, Sunan casually waved his hand, and countless wind blades surged forth, slicing through the air like arrows, tearing their lower bodies to shreds. By the time their upper bodies hit the ground, they finally reacted, letting out blood-curdling screams. The knights' robust physiques allowed them to scream for 4 or 5 minutes even after losing half their bodies, until they gradually fell silent, overwhelmed by fear and despair. Sunan retracted his gaze and looked around. In the wake of the invisible dragon's rampage, enemies were dead or wounded, and the remaining soldiers had fled in panic. Seeing this, Sunan directly ordered the invisible dragon to charge towards the enemy forces attacking the city. The siege troops had no idea they would be attacked from behind and were caught completely off guard. The soldiers at the siege were clueless about where the attack was coming from. They only looked up to see their comrades twisted and shattered, limbs and flesh flying, leaving them pale and dazed. Mathil also sensed something was wrong. What are those three doing? Why did they let the enemy through? But when he turned to look, all he saw was a scene of devastation and bodies strewn everywhere. What was going on? Where was the reserve army? How had they vanished in an instant? Mathel's face was one of shock. Meanwhile, Kyi, Bread, and Jodan, upon seeing the scene below, immediately thought of the invisible beast nurtured by Sunan and their faces lit up with excitement. It's Lord Sunan. Lord Sunan has returned. The name Sunan seemed to hold some kind of magic. As soon as it was uttered, the morale of the defending knights surged, and their offensive became much fiercer. Sunan? That wizard. Mathel's expression changed, realizing that he and his companions had likely misjudged a very important piece of intel. Unfortunately, it was too late to realize. Being a decisive figure, Mathel wasted no time. Sensing the danger, he retreated hastily and leaped off the city wall, intending to flee. But just as he landed, he felt a tightness around his ankle and looked down in astonishment to find a blood-red vine wrapping around him, creeping up his leg. Mathel immediately swung his sword to cut it away, but the blood-red vine was surprisingly resilient. Despite using all his strength, he only managed to sever one strand. Moreover, he could clearly feel his energy being drained, absorbed by these strange vines. Not far away, Sunan slightly raised his hand, and the blood vine ring on his finger glimmered with a faint light. He smiled coldly, and with a flash of brilliance in his palm, 3 magical missiles shot out, whistling through the air. Unable to dodge due to the blood vines restricting him, Mathel could only watch helplessly as the missiles came at him, piercing through his armor and causing his aura shield to ripple violently. The violent impact turned Mathel pale. Before he could recover, another 3 missiles came hurtling towards him. Under the overwhelming fear of death, Mathel shouted, his powerful aura erupting as he tore the blood vines apart and fled without looking back. But just 10 meters into his escape, he suddenly felt a chill shoot up his spine and instinctively raised his sword to slash at an angle behind him. Clang! A crisp sound of metal clashing erupted. It felt as if his sword had struck something, sending sparks flying. In his peripheral vision, Mathel vaguely saw the outline of a monstrous beast with sharp claws and teeth. Before he could process it, the beast suddenly twisted around, its thick tail whipping through the air. Bang! Mathel was sent flying like a kite with a broken string, spitting out blood in midair before crashing heavily to the ground. Sizzle! The 3 magical missiles followed closely, and Mathel's head exploded like a watermelon. Watching the headless corpse fall to the ground, Sunan slowly retracted his hand. High-ranking knights were indeed a bit more troublesome. Without using rune stones, he still had to team up with the invisible dragon to take them down. Mathel's death was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. The siege soldiers could no longer hold on and began to rout. Bread, Jodan, and other leaders immediately opened the city gates, leading their troops to pursue the fleeing enemy. Kyi strode up to Sunan, laughing heartily as he gave him a warm embrace. Welcome home. Chapter 54, The Golem. Due to Sunan's unexpected intervention, the war concluded in a way that no one had anticipated. In this battle, the enemy suffered over 1,300 casualties, with around 600 to 700 soldiers captured. Many others fled, disappearing without a trace. In contrast, the number of soldiers lost from Blackstone City was relatively low. Fewer than 200. However, over 20 Blackrock Panthers were destroyed. As the aftermath was assessed, Bread's face twitched with distress at the loss of the Panthers. Most people, however, were filled with excitement. After all, to defeat the rebels at such a cost was more than worth it. With the victory, a festive atmosphere enveloped Blackstone City. That evening, Kyi hosted a celebratory banquet in the inner fortress hall. Knights gathered together, drinking and rejoicing. Some injured knights, bandaged up, were still competing in drinking contests. After a round of drinks in the main hall with the generals, Kyi made his way to the conference room at the back, where he found Sunan resting, only to discover he was petting a cat. When did you get a cat? Kyi asked, surprised, glancing at the white cat lounging on Sunan's lap. This is Amy, my friend, Sunan replied with a slight smile, introducing Amy, this is my brother Kyi. Seeing Sunan introduce a cat with such seriousness amused Kyi, but his eyes widened in shock the next moment. Meow, nice to meet you, the cat actually raised its paw to greet him. A talking cat? Kyi's mouth fell open slightly. Even after witnessing many extraordinary things from Sunan, he felt his worldview challenged at this moment. This world was even more fantastical than he had imagined. Hello, Kyi greeted Amy with a strangely mixed expression. He then sat down opposite Sunan, took a sip of his drink, gathered his thoughts, and slowly spoke. I think now is a good time to reclaim the shimmering territory. Sunan seemed to have anticipated Kyi's words, showing no surprise as he nodded with a smile. When do you plan to move out? 3 days from now, Kyi replied solemnly. We can't give Owen time to regroup his fleeing soldiers, otherwise, it'll be even harder to take down Shimmering City. Even with the change in offense and defense, it won't be easy for us to take Shimmering City, even without counting those fleeing soldiers. Indeed. Kyi glanced at Sunan, a knowing smile creeping onto his face. But you're here, right? Sunan chuckled and nodded without saying more. He understood Kyi's implication. He had over 10 methods to breach the gates of Shimmering City. Once the siege turned into street fighting, Blackstone City would have a much greater advantage. With the elite cavalry almost entirely wiped out and the army severely diminished, losing the high walls of Shimmering City would leave Owen with little chance against Blackstone City. How has the sale of potions progressed? Sunan suddenly recalled that before heading to Stonechime City, he had left a batch of potions for Kyi to trial with the Firefox Trading Company, curious about the outcome. Mentioning this, Kyi's face broke into a delighted smile. The response has been excellent. The potions were very popular and sold out in less than 3 days. Muzhuo also brought news that many lords from the Jinghua Principality want to reorder a batch from us. I've already received intent orders for over 500 bottles. Muzhuo's idea is to see what you think. If you want to accept the orders, he can collect a portion of the deposit from those lords in advance. Of course, we should take it, Sunan said without hesitation. After reclaiming the Shimmering territory, he planned to establish a base, creating his own magical plant garden, along with facilities for crafting magical items, potion rooms, large laboratories, and puppet factories. He would need at least 20,000 to 30,000 gold coins for such a large expenditure. It was impossible to rely solely on the territory's resources, he needed to find ways to earn money to supplement the costs. With the potion sales established, the economic pressure would ease significantly. The Firefox Trading Company also sent a lot of items. I had them delivered to the warehouse in your yard, you can check it out when you have time. Got it. Sunan stood up and left the conference room. Back in the yard, Amy jumped from Sunan's arms and leaped away, disappearing to play with the invisible dragon. Sunan headed to the warehouse and quickly found several boxes stacked in a corner. 2 of the boxes were filled to the brim with books. These books had clearly been meticulously cleaned, but both the covers and the pages exuded a sense of time-worn antiquity. Sunan picked them up one by one and flipped through them. As expected, over 90% of the books were knowledge-based, and many overlapped with what he already possessed. There were only 4 books on spell models. One was a 0-ring spell, Message. Another was a 2-ring spell, Acid Arrow. Among the items left behind by Amy's previous owner, there was also a 2-ring spell model book, Shatter Wave. These 2 spells were practical attack spells among the 2-ring spells. The last 2 books, however, brought Sunan a pleasant surprise. Both were 1-ring spell model books, Silent Illusion and Summon Monster Eye. The former was considered a must-learn spell for wizards. Its effect was to instantly create an illusion of a single object or creature within a certain range, which could move freely to confuse the enemy. Mastering this spell would undoubtedly enhance combat flexibility. Though Summon Monster Eye had some unpredictability, it could yield significant results at opportune times if luck was on his side. Moreover, the high uncertainty could be compensated by the number of attempts, as long as he prepared in advance. In summary, both spells were highly useful. Counting these 2, I now have 9 1-ring spells that I haven't mastered yet. Fully mastering them will take at least a year or so. Sunan mused quietly. That said, he couldn't help but want more spells. The more spells a wizard mastered, the better they could handle various unexpected situations. In addition to the spells, he also found several books of interest among the knowledge-based texts. One was titled Puppets and Golems. Golems could be considered a branch of puppets and were one of the most extensively researched and technologically advanced branches since wizards first emerged. Initially, golems were created as simple intelligent servants and assistants. It wasn't until later that some wizards attempted to add runic secret techniques to them, endowing them with corresponding specialties and skills, which significantly enhanced their combat capabilities, leading to their widespread use on battlefields and the emergence of the renowned golem legions. As more and more wizards devoted themselves to the research and development of golems, the types of golems gradually increased, and their powers expanded significantly. Chapter 55, A Miracle. Based on the materials used, golems can be roughly classified into several types: flesh golems, clay golems, stone golems, metal golems, and supreme golems, among others. Flesh golems are particularly unique, as their power depends on the quality of the flesh used in their creation, allowing for a wide range of capabilities. At the lower end, a low-tier flesh golem made from the flesh of ferocious beasts may not possess much more combat ability than a novice knight. On the upper end, a divine body golem made from the flesh of deities could make even true spirit wizards retreat in fear. Clay golems are primarily used as laborers and are not particularly strong, mostly capable of bullying apprentice knights. Stone golems are slightly better, possessing combat abilities on par with formal knights. Metal golems come in a wider variety. There are iron golems, fine gold golems, shadow steel golems, diamond golems, and so forth. Generally speaking, the more precious the material, the more powerful the golem created. Even the lowest tier iron golem possesses combat abilities equivalent to that of a legendary knight. Golems like shadow steel and diamond are capable of fighting against formal wizards. Of course, the manufacturing costs for such golems are astronomical. Sunan was unsure if he could find the materials needed to create shadow steel and diamond golems on Starlight Continent today. As for supreme golems, they represent the original form of magical constructs. On top of this original form, wizards have developed legendary constructs like arcane guardians, magical mechs, tower spirits, and mithril sages. These legendary constructs are typically used to combat deities. In addition to the aforementioned types of golems, there are also special models like deep dark golems, strangler golems, and skeletal golems. However, due to their narrow functionality, only wizards with specific needs tend to create these. Overall, the combat capabilities of golems can vary greatly depending on their type. Many wizards manufacture golems for labor or as guards. Sunan had considered a similar idea. However, to create a golem, a soul core is essential. The soul core grants the golem basic intelligence, allowing it to perform simple repetitive tasks. Clay and stone golems are not too demanding in terms of soul core quality and can use gemstones as a substitute. But for higher tier metal golems, soul crystals are required. Soul crystals can be categorized into 5 levels: micro, small, medium, large, and legendary, based on their quality and potency. Typically, the higher the grade of the soul crystal used, the more intelligent the golem produced. The soul crystal Sunan obtained from the Kubero Manor was merely the lowest grade micro soul crystal. It was sufficient for creating an iron golem, but he would struggle with higher tier golems. At this stage, having an iron golem was already quite satisfying for Sunan. Once I build the magical crystal forging furnace, I can start making golems. The second book that caught Sunan's interest was about how to artificially create secondary magic stones. Secondary magic stones are artificially made energy crystals that contain less energy than true magic stones. While they cannot match the versatility and functionality of true magic stones, they can serve as substitutes in many situations, hence being termed secondary magic stones. In the age of wizards 1,000 years ago, the use of secondary magic stones was not widespread. However, as the concentration of energy particles has significantly declined, all magic stone mines on Starlight Continent have now been depleted, and the natural production of magic stones has ceased, highlighting the importance of secondary magic stones. It can even be said that secondary magic stones are now the only option for wizard apprentices when choosing energy crystals. This is good. With a secondary magic stone, I should be able to synthesize a real magic stone using the cube. Sunan's eyes lit up. If he could obtain magic stones, it would simplify the construction of the magical crystal forging furnace and the establishment of energy particle gathering arrays in his magical plant garden. After setting aside the organized books, Sunan turned to the last box. Inside were items that appeared to be quite aged. However, upon inspection, he found that most were antiques of no use to him. Only 2 objects, which still bore faint patterns, seemed to have once been magical items. Yet, due to the erosion of time, these 2 items were now completely ruined. Magical items from 1,000 years ago are mostly unusable now. It was lucky to have obtained the protective ring and magic coin before. It seems I must rely on myself to create magical items. Sunan cleared out the useless items and instructed a servant to dispose of them, then headed to the laboratory. During his recent outings, he had used a considerable number of rune stones. Considering that he would soon be attacking Shimmering City, he needed to craft another batch of rune stones for protection. The over 2,000 gold coins he obtained from the Starlight Church stronghold had all been converted into various gemstones, and he planned to use half of them to create rune stones. Baron Owen's attack on Blackstone City had drawn the attention of many nobles. When Baron Owen took advantage of his brother's death to seize the title, exiling the two nephews to Blackstone City, it stirred quite a commotion in the Golden Rock province. Many speculated that once Baron Owen consolidated his control over Shimmering territory, he would move to eliminate the threat entirely. As expected, right after winter, Baron Owen was eager to deploy his forces. He used the excuse that Blackstone City was in collusion with the Starlight Church. A blatant lie. Many nobles disapproved of Baron Owen's shameless tactics and felt sympathy for the Kyi brothers. However, no one believed Blackstone City could defeat Baron Owen. After all, the disparity in strength between the two sides was glaringly obvious. Yet, the final outcome astonished everyone who paid attention to the matter. Baron Owen was actually defeated. And it was a crushing defeat. His army of 5,000 was decimated, with only about half managing to escape. The elite cavalry corps was completely annihilated. The leading knight Mathil and 3 lords were killed on the spot. Describing it as heavy casualties was an understatement. After this battle, the power dynamic between Baron Owen and Blackstone City had completely reversed. In a short time, all the nobles in Golden Rock Province gained a new understanding of Blackstone City's strength. Sunan's name officially entered the sights of many nobles. According to the fleeing soldiers, the 3 lords and Knight Mathil had all died at Sunan's hands. He could unleash lightning, wind blades, and summon blood vines, employing godlike techniques. He also had a giant beast that could turn invisible. It was precisely due to the surprise attack of that giant beast that the army collapsed so swiftly, leading to their defeat. One could say that the defeat of Shimmering City was largely attributable to Sunan. With his strength alone, he dramatically changed the course of the war. Nobles who heard this news were left dumbfounded. It was known that even a powerful knight could not achieve such a feat. Only a legendary knight might have a chance. For someone under 20 to accomplish what even legendary knights could not is nothing short of a miracle. It was from this event that the nobles of Golden Rock Province realized that the legends about wizards were indeed true. In a flash, aside from a small group of nobles who already knew the secrets of wizards, everyone began to gather information about wizards. Just 4 days after the battle ended, an even more shocking news emerged, creating a huge uproar in Golden Rock Province. Blackstone City was officially deploying troops, aiming straight for Shimmering City. Chapter 56, Just in Time. Crack. The sound of breaking porcelain echoed in the conference hall. Owen, gripping the cracked cup, ignored the shards that pierced his skin, blood trickling down as his bloodshot eyes fixed on the middle-aged man seated opposite him. His voice was hoarse as he said, "Did the Marquis really say that?" The middle-aged man, impeccably dressed with a pair of small mustaches, exuded an air of comfort and privilege. After hearing Owen's words, he took a sip of red tea before leisurely responding. "The Marquis has been busy dealing with matters in Storm territory and has no time for your affairs. Moreover, the Marquis has already provided you with considerable assistance, even arranging for assassins from the Starlight Church. What have you done to repay him? Being forced into this position by 2 young pups, do you even realize how many nobles are out there laughing at you?" The man spoke slowly, his words lacking any mercy. Owen felt his temples throb with anger but dared not explode in front of this man. He gritted his teeth and suppressed his rage. To be honest, he couldn't understand why things had deteriorated to this point. In less than 2 years, how had those 2 brothers managed to bolster Blackstone City to such an extent? And that Sunan, who had been a complete failure, unable to even grasp the breathing technique 2 years ago. How had he suddenly become a wizard, with even Mathil falling to him? It was incomprehensible. Owen truly found it baffling. Perhaps he should have disregarded appearances and taken out the 2 brothers directly when he had the chance. But regretting it now was too late. Unless Marquis Jinian was willing to send troops, his remaining forces had little chance of holding Shimmering City. Even if he could hold the city, his status as Baron of Shimmering would likely become a mere formality. With that thought, Owen took a deep breath, suppressing his frustration, and said, "Gillette, if the Marquis is dissatisfied with me, he can punish me later. I'd accept it without complaint. But once Shimmering territory changes hands, it will be difficult for the Marquis to regain control over this land. Does he really wish to abandon Shimmering territory?" Gillette glanced at Owen with a half-smile. "You don't need to worry about that. Even if Shimmering territory changes hands, the Marquis will personally take it back in the future." Owen was taken aback. What did that mean? Was Marquis Jinian finally going to break the unwritten rules among the nobles and directly seize land from other nobles? But if he were to do that, the entire principality's nobles would surely rise against him. Even Marquis Jinian couldn't bear the consequences of such an action. Or could it be that Marquis Jinian had a way to make the other nobles turn a blind eye? What do you mean, envoy? Owen asked, filled with uncertainty. You don't need to concern yourself with that, Gillette waved his hand dismissively, narrowing his eyes. Though you have failed in your duties, the Marquis is broad-minded. Considering your past service, he has instructed me to take you away from Shimmering City. You can settle down as a lord in Golden Rock City. Owen's face turned ashen. The difference between being a baron and a mere lord was a bitter pill to swallow. However, if he didn't do this, there was no way he could hold Shimmering City on his own. The only outcome would be to perish alongside it. Gillette leisurely sipped his tea, looking down at Owen, who was shifting through a myriad of emotions. He believed Owen would make a wise choice. At this point, Owen really had no other path left. Just then, a sudden flurry of footsteps echoed from outside. A hurried clerk rushed into the hall, seemingly wanting to report something, but when he saw Gillette and the cloaked man sitting beside him, he hesitated. Owen waved his hand impatiently. Speak quickly. The clerk quickly bowed and said, My lord, scouts report that the army from Blackstone City has marched to within 5 kilometers of the city. They will reach the gates in less than an hour. As soon as the words fell, Owen jumped up from his chair, panic evident on his face. How could they arrive so quickly? Realizing he had lost his composure, he struggled to regain his calm, waving his hand to feign composure. Send orders for Dario to hold the city. We cannot allow anyone from Blackstone City to step inside. Once the clerk bowed and left, Owen no longer hesitated. He quickly turned to Gillette and said, Envoy, I agree. I'll go with you to Golden Rock City. Gillette set down his teacup, smiling slightly. A wise choice. Please wait a moment, Envoy. I'll have my things packed right away. Even in flight, he needed to take his possessions with him. If he wanted to be a lord, he needed money to purchase land. With time running out before the army of Blackstone City launched an assault, he needed to gather his assets quickly. To avoid displeasing Gillette, Owen even stepped forward to slip a small bag of gold coins into Gillette's hand. Thank you for your trouble, envoy. Gillette weighed the bag with a smile. Baron, there's no need to rush. Rest assured, with Lord Hodge here, even if the army from Blackstone City surrounds Shimmering City, we'll be able to leave safely. Owen looked in surprise at the cloaked man beside him. Since entering the hall, the cloaked man had remained silent, quietly sitting without saying a word. He had thought the man was merely Gillette's guard. However, from Gillette's tone, it seemed that this Lord Hodge held a status not lower than his own. May I ask who Lord Hodge is? Owen was about to probe further when he suddenly heard a commotion outside, frowning as he attempted to call for guards to investigate. But Hodge suddenly stood up. Something's wrong. There are screams. Assassins! Assassins! Owen was skeptical. The army from Blackstone City was still 10 kilometers away, and his estate was heavily guarded. What kind of assassin could break in? However, Owen wouldn't need to wonder for long. The sounds of shouting quickly approached the conference hall and then fell eerily silent. Moments later, a figure stepped slowly into the hall. As soon as Owen recognized the person's face, his eyes widened in horror. Sunan. Gillette's gaze sharpened, and he instinctively straightened up, looking with keen interest at the young man standing in the doorway. This was the rumored wizard of Blackstone City? Sunan scanned the three figures in the hall, his gaze lingering momentarily on Hodge before he smirked and said. It seems I came just in time. Are you three discussing how to escape? Chapter 57, Don't overestimate yourself, young man. Without bothering to respond to Sunan's teasing words, Owen instinctively took a step back, panic flashing in his eyes as he shouted, Someone! Quick, there are assassins! His shrill voice, tinged with fear, made Gillette frown, his gaze at Owen filled with disdain. The enemy was already inside, it was obvious that the guards had been slaughtered. Yet here he was, acting foolishly and calling for help. How embarrassing! How had he not realized before that this man was such an idiot? Owen quickly came to the same realization, his face turning pale as cold sweat trickled down his forehead. Ignoring Owen, Gillette turned to Sunan with a smirk, saying playfully, Sunan Anist, I've heard about you. The legendary wizard. The Marquis has praised you as a promising young man. So, what do you say? Would you consider serving the Marquis? If you achieve enough merit, not just a mere barren title, even a viscount title could be granted to you. Who are you? Sunan asked, glancing at Gillette. Gillette Kanos, envoy of Marquis Jinyan. Gillette lifted his chin slightly, his tone laced with arrogance. Ah, just a dog of Marquis Jinyan, Sunan shook his head. Gillette's smile faltered, his expression darkening as he coldly replied, young man, don't overestimate yourself. Don't think that just because you've become a wizard, you can look down on everything. There are plenty of people in this world stronger than you. Sunan chuckled lightly. And so? Seeing Sunan's complete disregard for him, Gillette was thoroughly enraged, his face turning cold and stern. It seems you're just a fool who can't see the situation. I've overestimated you. Someone like you isn't worthy of serving the Marquis. Well then, since you're here, don't leave. Leave your life here. Lord Hodge, I'll leave it to you. The last sentence was directed at the cloaked man beside him. Hodge nodded, pulling off his cloak to reveal a weathered face in his 40s, adorned with silver scales and wielding a steel longsword. I've heard many rumors about wizards, but this is my first encounter. I hope you won't disappoint me. Hodge's eyes gleamed with fierce combat spirit as he fixed his gaze on Sunan. Before Sunan could respond, Hodge lunged forward, swinging his sword down. With a sharp sound slicing through the air, a crimson flame blade materialized, hurtling towards Sunan like a bolt of lightning. Elemental power. Sunan's expression sharpened. He didn't dodge, instead, an invisible shield instantly shifted to the front, blocking the flaming sword energy. When the attack missed, Hodge showed no disappointment. He charged again, lightning fast, aiming for Sunan. Sunan quickly threw out a bolt of lightning to intercept Hodge momentarily, using the chance to retreat swiftly, exiting the hall in an instant. Watching the two clash and rush out of the hall, Owen stood dumbfounded, astonishment plastered across his face. Elemental power. Lord Hodge is a legendary knight. Gillette smiled smugly. I told you, with Lord Hodge here, we have nothing to worry about. As Owen regained his senses, he felt a rush of exhilaration, a stark contrast to his earlier panic. Legendary knights were the pinnacle of power in the principality. One legendary knight could take on dozens of high knights. With a legendary knight at his side, what was there to fear? Owen's dread vanished, replaced by excitement. The two quickly left the hall and entered the courtyard. Once a serene and elegant space, the courtyard was now a chaotic mess, littered with broken wood and stone. Hodge, wielding a sword engulfed in roaring flames, relentlessly attacked Sunan. The latter was nearly pinned down, barely able to evade, relying on his shield and protective ring to defend himself, occasionally raising his hand to unleash counterattacks of lightning and wind. Fire, lightning, and wind intertwined in a tumultuous clash, filling the air with a deafening roar. Unlike high knights who generated their aura through sheer will, legendary knights had, to some extent, transcended the limitations of their physical bodies. They could commune with the energy particles of nature. Similar to second-tier wizard apprentices, they had begun to master the manipulation of energy particles. The difference was that most legendary knights could only transform a single energy particle into one elemental form, unlike wizard apprentices who could manipulate multiple energy particles with greater variety in their techniques. Even so, a legendary knight wielding elemental power had combat capabilities that far surpassed those of a high knight. To put it simply, they evolved from ordinary physical warriors into hybrid spellcasters, capable of both martial and magical prowess. Moreover, they could absorb energy particles to replenish their consumption, greatly enhancing their endurance. A legendary knight with elemental power could single-handedly challenge entire armies, enough to sway the outcome of small-scale battles. Because of the power and rarity of legendary knights, their appearances on the battlefield had become increasingly rare in recent years. They were often treated as strategic weapons and deployed only when absolutely necessary. Honestly, encountering a legendary knight here was somewhat unexpected for Sunan. Dealing with such a high-level opponent was indeed a challenge for him as a second-tier wizard apprentice. Just then, Sunan's expression shifted slightly, a smile forming on his face. At the same time, Hodge seemed to sense something, abruptly swinging his sword towards the side. Clang! A burst of sparks erupted in the empty air. Accompanying it was a low, hissing sound. Hodge slashed through the air, unleashing a wave of flames that scorched the atmosphere, vaguely outlining the silhouette of a giant beast on all fours. It swiftly morphed into an incorporeal form, evading the flames while retreating to Sunan's side, letting out a low hiss. Sunan chuckled softly, "Well done." Hodge narrowed his eyes, his gaze fixed intently on the empty space beside Sunan. Although there was nothing visible, he felt as if he could clearly sense the presence of the invisible dragon. Just as the intel described. A beast that can perfectly conceal itself. But if you think that will allow you to defeat me, you underestimate a legendary knight. At the legendary knight level, determining an enemy's location relied less on mere eyesight and more on perception. Unless one could hide their aura, even if they eliminated their shape, sound, and scent, a legendary knight could still sense their enemy's position through perception. In the hall's doorway, Gillette observed the scene with a look of disdain on his face. "Useless, Sunan. The power of a legendary knight far exceeds your imagination. Your little tricks won't work against Lord Hodge." Sunan couldn't even be bothered to respond to Gillette's taunts. When it came to understanding legendary knights, everyone present, including Hodge himself, likely knew less than he did. In his previous life, Sunan had defeated no fewer than 70 or 80 legendary knights. Among them, some even wielded spatial powers. In contrast, Hodge could only be considered average. Though it was indeed tricky, it wasn't insurmountable. "Looks like I'll have to spend some money again." Sunan sighed, flipping his wrist, and several sparkling rune stones appeared in his palm. Chapter 58, The Humanoid Cannon. "That's a gem." Gillette squinted, staring at the gems in Sunan's hands, puzzled. But soon, he dismissed this thought. No matter how powerful a wizard was, he was still being suppressed by Lord Hodge. Even with that beast assisting him, Sunan could not possibly be Hodge's match. From the moment Sunan appeared, his fate had already been sealed. It was either surrender or die. It seemed the young man was too proud, always thinking he was formidable, unaware that the world was far broader than he imagined. "You're lucky," Gillette turned to Owen with a smirk. "Once Sunan is dead, the morale of the Blackstone City army will surely plummet. Perhaps you can take this opportunity to strike hard at your opponent." "Indeed, Envoy," Owen replied, his expression equally excited. If they could eliminate Sunan, it wouldn't immediately resolve their predicament, but at least it would buy them some breathing room. With some luck, they might even defeat Blackstone City and regain control of Shimmering territory. With this thought, Owen became increasingly animated, his eyes glued to the battle in the courtyard, eagerly anticipating Hodge killing Sunan at any moment. After a brief pause, the battle resumed. Just as Hodge had said, the invisible dragon's stealth ability was nearly useless against him. Every time the dragon attacked, Hodge instantly sensed its position the moment it shifted from incorporeal to corporeal, easily deflecting its strikes while leaving several charred wounds on the dragon. The invisible dragon is still struggling against a legendary knight. Unless it fully transforms its bloodline into that of a semi-dragon, it won't possess the strength to battle a legendary knight. Sunan contemplated silently. However, with the invisible dragon drawing most of Hodge's attention, Sunan found his situation much more manageable. He tossed a rune stone. Boom! The gem exploded in mid-air, releasing countless twisting lightning bolts that cascaded down, enveloping Hodge from head to toe. The overwhelming force caused Hodge's expression to change, and he quickly retreated while swinging his sword to unleash a flame blade above him. Crackle! Although quick to react and managing to extinguish most of the lightning with his fire blade, Hodge was still struck by the remaining bolts, momentarily freezing in place as his aura flickered violently. "What was that?" Hodge exclaimed, astonished. The power behind that attack was far more terrifying than any previous assault from Sunan. Even with his dual defenses of fire elemental power and aura, he had been injured. However, reality left Hodge no time to ponder, as Sunan quickly threw another rune stone, launching a second wave of attacks. This time, shadows inky and deep surged forth. Shadow corruption. Without time to react, Hodge was hit squarely, feeling a chill envelop him as if bound by invisible shackles, significantly slowing his movements. He found it harder to manipulate his aura and control the energy particles, as if they had rusted over. Not far away, Sunan tossed out 3 more gems. Following lightning and shadows, fire, frost, and hurricane surged forth, overwhelming Hodge. Facing a legendary knight, Sunan fully unleashed his potential, transforming into a humanoid cannon, continuously hurling rune stones. In just 4 or 5 breaths, he had expended over 20 rune stones. At this point, Hodge was left dazed. He felt as if he were being attacked by multiple legendary knights, with various elemental assaults raining down from all directions. Amidst the relentless barrage, he couldn't even absorb energy particles to recover. The aura surrounding him was quickly shattered. After enduring several waves of attacks with his flesh and blood, Hodge bore wounds from frostbite, wind cuts, and lightning burns, looking utterly battered and devoid of the earlier fighting spirit. Damn it! Since becoming a legendary knight, Hodge had never felt so overwhelmed. Fueled by intense anger, he unleashed his full power and charged at Sunan, braving the oncoming thunder and frost. Then he saw Sunan spread his hands, 6 shimmering rune stones glowing in his palms. At that moment, Hodge had never wanted to curse so badly. How many gems does this damn kid have? Unfortunately, he would never find out. The next instant, a torrent of elemental attacks engulfed him. Boom! A violent shockwave erupted from Hodge's position, sending debris flying in all directions. Even from a distance, Gillette and Owen were knocked back several steps by the oncoming blast, feeling the sting of stones hitting their faces. However, they had no time to worry about anything else, their gazes fixed in shock at the center of the courtyard, mouths agape in disbelief. How had it come to this? Just moments ago, Hodge had held the upper hand. How had he been reduced to such a pitiful state in the blink of an eye? What on earth was happening? As the wind blew away the dust, the scene in the courtyard became clear. Hodge lay motionless on the ground, covered in frost and scorch marks, no longer breathing. Looking at the corpse, Sunan felt a twinge of regret. The soul of a legendary knight could at least produce a small soul crystal, but he was currently unable to extract the soul from the body. What a waste! Retracting his gaze, Sunan turned to look at Gillette and Owen. As their eyes met, both men instinctively stepped back, their faces pale with fear. Lord Sunan, we can still discuss this. The Marquis of Jinyan. Gillette stammered, terror evident on his face, completely devoid of his earlier arrogance. Sunan, however, had no intention of engaging in conversation. With a flick of his finger, a bolt of lightning shot forth, piercing through Gillette's forehead. The envoy's eyes widened in shock, his face contorted with fear and despair as he collapsed to the ground. Owen, terrified, fell to his knees, visibly shaken as he pleaded, Sunan, please spare me. I don't want the title anymore, I'll return it. Just let me live, I beg you. Before he could finish, he was struck by a sleep spell, falling unconscious instantly. Killing you like this is too merciful. You truly belong at the execution ground. Sunan turned and faced the city gates, patting the approaching invisible dragon on the head. Go, break down the city gates and welcome my brothers into the city. The invisible dragon let out a roar and swiftly vanished. Moments later, a thunderous crash echoed from the direction of the city gates, followed by a chorus of battle cries. Chapter 59, Waiting for a Storm. At the end of the month of winter strings, the snow had not completely melted away. With some time still left until the winds of revival arrived, the entire Golden Rock province was already stirring restlessly. 2 recent events had sent shockwaves through the noble circles of Golden Rock province. The first was related to Storm territory. After being unconscious for over half a year, Count Storm was finally declared dead. Surprisingly, his title was inherited by his youngest son. During the subsequent succession ceremony, Marquis Jinyan attended and bestowed blessings upon the new Count Storm. The second event was the transfer of the title of Baron of Shimmering. To be honest, many nobles had been mentally prepared for this outcome. However, the manner in which it unfolded took them somewhat by surprise. Blackstone City had taken Shimmering City almost without a fight. According to battle reports, just as the Blackstone army arrived at the gates of Shimmering City, the gates shattered with a loud crash, and several generals were inexplicably torn to shreds before the watchful eyes of all, dying on the spot. Thus, before the war had even begun, the defending troops of Shimmering City had already fallen into chaos. The Blackstone army then charged in, taking control of the entire Shimmering City with little effort. This outcome left many people dumbfounded. Moreover, many astute nobles, upon seeing this battle report, guessed at Sunan's role in this victory. In the aftermath of the battle, numerous nobles waited for Marquis Jinyan's response. After all, everyone knew that Owen was backed by Marquis Jinyan. Now that Owen had been executed, with the title of Baron of Shimmering changing hands, if Marquis Jinyan did nothing, his prestige would undoubtedly plummet. Surprisingly, however, a significant amount of time had passed since the war, and Marquis Jinyan had shown no reaction at all. He allowed the newly appointed Baron Kyianis to easily consolidate control over shimmering territory. Many nobles were left scratching their heads in confusion. Only a few nobles, such as Count Winterfrost, Viscount Blackwater, and Viscount Feathered Serpent, who were close to Marquis Jinian, understood what the latter was cautiously considering. Golden Rock City, Inner Fortress. Under the guidance of the steward, two cloaked men made their way through the courtyard and entered a spacious, well-lit corridor. The corridor was lined with expensive-looking oil paintings, with sunlight streaming through the windows, causing the gilded frames to gleam. Caspar lagged behind, glancing at one particular oil painting, his lips twitching slightly. He recognized the painting of Princess Jinghua, which had recently fetched a high price of 3,800 gold coins at a major auction. Yet, such a valuable painting was now prominently displayed in the corridor. Looking at the dozens of other oil paintings that likely held similar value, Caspar couldn't help but marvel inwardly. It was said that Marquis Jinian was wealthier than a nation, and it seemed the rumors were indeed true. In this world, gold represented power, so it was no wonder that Marquis Jinian was reluctant to remain just a regional overlord. Lost in thought, the three finally arrived at the end of the corridor. The steward raised his hand and gently knocked on the door, saying, "My lord, your two esteemed guests have arrived. Come in." A deep, rich voice responded from inside. The steward gently pushed the door open, stepping aside to allow the two men to enter. Inside the study, Marquis Jinian stood by the window, gazing into the sky, his expression contemplative. Just 2 months ago, he had celebrated his 60th birthday, yet his hair remained as glossy and black as ever, and his skin was firm and rosy. Anyone who saw him would think he was only in his 30s. "High Priest Joris, it's been a while." Marquis Jinian turned, a smile breaking on his rugged face as he gestured for the two to sit. "It's been a while, my lord. I'm glad to see you well." After Marquis Jinian took his seat, Joris also sat down opposite him. Caspar, for his part, stood to the side, fully aware that he had not yet earned the right to sit before these two. "I'm getting older, my health is starting to decline. Old injuries from battles occasionally flare up. Time waits for no one. My lord, you're still much sturdier than I am." The two exchanged pleasantries like old friends before Marquis Jinian got to the point. High Priest Joris didn't come all this way just to engage in small talk, did he? Joris's smile faded, his expression turning serious. "I've come to discuss Sunan." The mention of Sunan caused a fleeting shadow to pass over Marquis Jinian's face, his gaze sharpening. Caspar instinctively tensed up. At that moment, Marquis Jinian truly revealed the edge of a seasoned legendary knight who ruled over Golden Rock Province. "Sunan? Has he tangled with your church?" Marquis Jinian raised an eyebrow. From his perspective, the only connection Sunan had with the Starlight Church was the assassination attempt that had occurred in Blackstone City. He had previously wondered about the failure of the Starlight Church assassins, but the reports from the Blackstone battle had made everything clear. If even Hodge had fallen to Sunan, it was no surprise that the two lowly High Knights had failed in their assassination attempt. However, since that attempt had been commissioned by Owen, even if it failed, it wouldn't make sense for the Starlight Church to take their anger out on Sunan. Yet Joris's next words surprised Marquis Jinian. "To be frank, my lord, 2 months ago, our stronghold in Stonechime City suffered heavy losses, with 6 priests and over 100 followers killed, and the culprit was a wizard. The assailant also had an invisible beast." Marquis Jinian's eyes flashed with realization. Invisible beasts were exceedingly rare, the odds of 2 appearing in Golden Rock Province were exceptionally low. Combined with the fact that both controllers were wizards, the probability became even smaller. No wonder the Starlight Church was convinced that the culprit was Sunan. "But how did Sunan know about your stronghold in Stonechime City?" Marquis Jinian was well aware that the followers of the Starlight Church had methods to resist interrogation. He couldn't extract any information from those fanatics. If it were otherwise, he wouldn't have felt secure in collaborating with the Starlight Church to carry out assassinations against nobles. "We haven't fully investigated that yet," Joris admitted, the corners of his eyes twitching slightly. His expression turned cold. "However, Sunan has killed many of our followers, and we will not let him go. I've come to discuss this with you, my lord. If you plan to send troops against Shimmering Territory, we are willing to assist you." Marquis Jinian tapped his fingers lightly on the table, smiling slightly. "I would be more than happy to have your church lend a hand, but now is not the right time to strike at Shimmering Territory." "When will it be?" Joris frowned slightly. He wasn't particularly anxious to kill Sunan, rather, he needed to retrieve the blood amber, which was crucial to their church. As long as it remained in Sunan's hands, they wouldn't be able to rest easy. Marquis Jinyan moved to the window, gazing deeply toward the south. Waiting for a storm. A storm that will sweep across the entire principality. Chapter 60, Base Construction. Move faster. We have to get everything to the destination before dark. Inside Shimmering City, a transport convoy moved slowly along the blue stone road, the sound of wheels turning creating a continuous clatter. Residents along the way instinctively stepped aside, as a fully armed squad of soldiers trailed the convoy. The leading men, clad in full armor, were clearly knights. Shimmering City is definitely better, Blackstone City is just too remote, Jodan remarked, looking at the scenery on either side of the street. Shimmering City's architectural style leaned towards Romanesque, exuding a sense of grandeur and solemnity. The roads were well paved with blue stones, lined with flowers and trees, and the ground was clean and orderly, equipped with complete drainage systems. Even the buildings appeared more exquisite and well organized than those in Blackstone City. In comparison, Blackstone City seemed like a rural village. When we followed Lord Kyi to Blackstone City, who would have thought we'd be back in Shimmering territory so soon? One knight sighed. The others nodded in agreement, their expressions a mix of nostalgia and relief. Exactly. At one point, I thought I'd be stuck in Blackstone City for life. Yet, sometimes I still wonder if I'm dreaming. All of this is thanks to our Lord and Lord Sunan. But speaking of which, why did Lord Sunan move outside the city? Could it be? Before the knight could finish his thought, Jodan kicked him. Watch your mouth, or I'll smack you. Lord Barren and his brother are on good terms. Besides, Lord Sunan clearly has no interest in titles, he's going to be a wizard. But why doesn't he stay in the city? The outskirts are so desolate, it can't be as comfortable as the inner fortress. Another knight questioned. Jodan shrugged. I heard Lord Sunan wants to build a base outside the city. He plans to create a magical plantation and a puppet factory, which will require a lot of land, so he chose the outskirts. What we're transporting now is the construction materials for the base. Seeing the others look confused, Jodan waved his hand impatiently. Just follow Lord Sunan's orders. That's all we need to do. The others agreed. With plans from someone like Lord Sunan, who was of such strength, they certainly couldn't speculate. The convoy passed through the city, traveling another 4 or 5 kilometers north after exiting the city gates. Finally, they arrived at a flat area that had been excavated and leveled. Many workers were bustling about, the sounds of picks clanging against rocks filling the air. Jodan quickly spotted Sunan, who was surveying the area, seemingly searching for something. Lord Sunan, the Lord sent me to deliver supplies. Sunan nodded and called over a steward to handle the delivery. He then produced a list and handed it to Jodan. This is the next batch of materials needed, please give it to my brother. Of course, my lord. Jodan took the list, sneaking a glance at the items. Crystals, brass, silver, clay. The first few items made sense, but what was the clay for? Making pottery? Jodan wondered silently but wisely chose not to ask further, taking the list and bidding farewell to Sunan. Once he left, Sunan continued to investigate the surroundings. After taking Shimmering City, he had begun to implement his farming plans, promptly finding Kyi and marking out a piece of land on the nearby plains to establish his base. A qualified wizard needed their own territory to safely practice and study knowledge, as well as to develop. That's why many wizards built their own towers. Some powerful true spirit wizards even expended vast resources to construct floating cities. Unfortunately, both floating cities and wizard towers were beyond Sunan's reach at this stage. He had to settle for constructing a standard base instead. A complete base would need to include meditation areas, spell training zones, experimental spaces, living quarters, apothecary areas, magical plantations, magical item workshops, puppet factories, warehouses, and a series of other facilities. The area required for all these facilities would surpass that of an ordinary village. The cost in gold would also be substantial. Fortunately, Sunan had managed to produce a batch of potions during this time, which he had entrusted to the Firefox Trading Company for sale. The deposits received were just enough for the initial construction of the base. Currently, he was scouting the locations of the ley lines. Every world has underground veins of primal magical energy. These veins are referred to as ley line nodes, or elemental branches, or magic nodes, among other names. These names are merely labels. Essentially, ley line nodes are convergence points of natural energy. By using large magical arrays to set up energy supply channels at ley line nodes, one can provide stable magic energy transmission, significantly reducing energy costs. Otherwise, relying solely on magic stones to support the operations of magical plantations, magical item workshops, and puppet factories would require an investment that could consume the entire income of Shimmering Territory. The only issue was that, in the current Starlight continent, elemental energy was scarce, and the magical energy provided by ley line nodes had significantly decreased. Relying solely on the ley lines would probably only sustain the daily operations and maintenance of the base. To use devices like the magical crystal forging furnace, they would still need to supplement with magic stones. In light of this, a stockpile of magic stones was essential before the base construction could be completed. After confirming the ley line node, Sunan let out a long breath, turning his gaze to the busy workers below. Relying solely on human labor to build the base is still a bit slow. It would be best to manufacture a batch of clay golems to act as laborers. Clay golems possess nearly a ton of strength, making them highly efficient laborers. In many large-scale projects, a single clay golem could accomplish the work of hundreds of humans. Moreover, clay golems do not need rest or food. As long as they have sufficient energy supply and regular maintenance, they can operate continuously. Because of this, many wizards prefer to use clay golems as laborers or servants. Clay golems require simple materials, consume little energy, and are easy to maintain, making them the best choice for labor. With 10 clay golems, the efficiency of base construction could multiply, saving a significant amount of manpower. Additionally, the magical plantation and magical item workshop will also need dedicated personnel for maintenance. Besides being literate, they will need a foundational understanding of magical botany or enchanting, which will have to be cultivated from scratch. Training, learning spells, building the base, producing potions, crafting golems, and cultivating personnel. Sunan suddenly realized there was still so much to do. I have my work cut out for me. Chapter 61, Clay Golems. Jodan was highly efficient, delivering the materials Sunan needed the very next day. Sunan promptly directed the workers to transport the materials to the temporarily constructed laboratory, preparing to manufacture his first golem puppet. The main material for the clay golem was clay. A soil that was sticky and contained very few sand grains, making it difficult for moisture to pass through and offering excellent plasticity. To create a clay golem, approximately 0.5 tons of clay was required, along with a small amount of silver, crystals, and the most crucial item, a soul core. The lowest tier clay golem could use a gemstone as a soul core, but such golems would have extremely low intelligence and could only perform simple tasks. For instance, they could clean a designated area, move objects, or even smash things. In his previous life, Sunan had crafted numerous clay golems, and now, revisiting this familiar task, he quickly became adept once again. After more than half an hour, a clay body approximately 2.5 meters tall had taken shape on the spacious workbench. Its face was somewhat square, lacking a neck, with a broad and sturdy chest. Its thick arms hung down to its knees, with short but relatively nimble fingers. The legs were only about 1/3 the length of its body, and its large, flat feet provided stability. The chest of the clay golem was still open, revealing a complex array of enchanted runes within. Sunan placed the engraved gemstone inside and closed the recess, then began to chant the activation spell. The final step in creating a golem was to activate it, imbuing it with life. As the incantation flowed from his lips, the energy particles around him suddenly surged to life, swiftly converging from all directions and rushing into the clay golem's body. Also flowing in was elemental magical energy from the ley line node. As the energy poured in, the clay golem's body gradually began to change, a vitality unlike that of living flesh began to grow and swell within its clay form. The entire process lasted over 10 minutes. Eventually, the magical energy began to wane, and the energy particles settled into calm. Rustle. The clay golem on the workbench suddenly moved, and its massive, bulky body sat up, its rigid face staring blankly at Sunan. It worked. A smile of satisfaction appeared on Sunan's face as he pointed at a nearby box and commanded, "Move the box outside." "Yes, master." The clay golem responded with a deep, muted voice, then jumped off the workbench, landing heavily on the ground with a thud. Its movements were a bit clumsy at first, but it quickly adapted, effortlessly carrying the heavy box outside. Sunan nodded inwardly. Clay golems were incredibly useful laborers, especially since they consumed little energy. With a full charge of energy, they could work continuously for 4 or 5 days. When their energy was nearly depleted, they could quickly recharge by connecting to the ley line nodes array. They were truly the best kind of laborers. The most expensive part of creating a clay golem is that gemstone. The rest, clay, a bit of silver, brass, and crystals, are relatively inexpensive. The cost to create a clay golem is only about 10 gold coins. In the long run, it's much more cost-effective than hiring workers, and the efficiency is higher. Sunan immediately decided to produce 10 clay golems in the next couple of days to expedite the construction of the base. As for iron golems, he would have to wait until the puppet factory was up and running before he could start making those. After all, metal golems required more advanced skills and equipment. Unlike clay golems, which could be made with just a simple workbench. Time flew by, and the month of revival arrived. The snow melted, and the fields began to show signs of vibrant spring. With 10 clay golems dedicated to the construction, the speed of the base's development surged dramatically. Heavy stones that required several workers to lift could often be handled by a clay golem in one go, leaving the uneducated workers gaping in astonishment. Kyi visited several times and, after witnessing the clay golems at work, his eyes immediately lit up. These things are born to be heavy lifters. Kyi instantly entertained the idea of forming a clay golem logistics unit. Even after learning that the cost of a clay golem was over 10 gold coins, he remained undeterred. Even if it's expensive, it's still cheaper than the Blackrock cavalry. The impact on our logistical capabilities during warfare would be revolutionary. If we could build a logistics unit with these, the pressure on logistics during battles would be greatly alleviated. Unable to resist Kyi's enthusiasm, Sunan eventually agreed to supply him with a batch of clay golems once the base's manpower needs were satisfied. It was worth mentioning that after reclaiming shimmering territory, Kyi had swiftly halted the export of blackstone iron. The black iron produced in the blackstone mining area would now exclusively supply shimmering territory, to arm the military and expand the Blackrock cavalry. Expanding military strength remained the top priority for shimmering territory. After all, there was still a watchful Marquis Jinyan nearby. To expand the Blackrock cavalry, the first issue to address was the supply of secondary dragon blood potions. Currently, shimmering territory had only around 60 or 70 black-scale lizardmen captives, and the amount of blood that could be extracted each month was limited. The resulting secondary dragon blood potions were far from sufficient to support the rapid expansion of the Blackrock cavalry. Kyi had fretted over this matter and approached Sunan to discuss it several times. In response, Sunan had considered numerous solutions. For example, extracting blood from the invisible dragon. The bloodline concentration of the invisible dragon far exceeded that of ordinary black-scale lizardmen. Just one dragon could provide more blood materials each month than that group of captives combined. However, after much thought, Sunan ultimately dismissed this idea. If he continually extracted blood from the invisible dragon, it would significantly slow its bloodline enhancement rate. That was unacceptable to Sunan. While helping his territory grow was essential, his own strength improvement could not be neglected. Hodge's appearance had served as a wake-up call. Though the Starlight continent was currently an elemental desert, many hidden powers still existed. A legendary knight like Hodge had forced Sunan to expend nearly 30 rune stones to defeat him. If a stronger enemy appeared, he might not even have the luxury of escaping. Thus, for his own safety, he could not afford to slow down his growth. After thorough consideration, Sunan finally devised a feasible solution. That was to find a substitute for the secondary dragon blood potions. Given that the Blackrock cavalry would likely continue to expand, this substitute needed to be mass-producible and cost-effective. This ruled out potions. After much contemplation, Sunan's gaze finally fell upon magical plants. Though he didn't recall any magical plants that met his criteria in his memory, it didn't matter. If none existed, he would cultivate them himself. With the synthesis cube in hand, he naturally had a greater advantage in cultivating new magical plants than other wizard apprentices. "I've got some ideas regarding the potions, give me a bit more time to figure it out," Sunan said. Kyi, who had complete faith in his brother, visibly relaxed at his words. Suddenly, Kyi remembered something and asked Sunan, "You mentioned before about recruiting apprentices from the territory. What's that about?" "Once the base is completed, many areas will require dedicated personnel for maintenance. I plan to train them myself and see if I can uncover a few wizard apprentice prospects along the way." Upon hearing this last line, Kyi's spirits lifted. Blackstone City had rapidly developed and reclaimed shimmering territory largely due to Sunan's presence as a wizard apprentice. The importance of having a wizard apprentice for the development of a territory had been proven. If they could cultivate a few more wizard apprentices, it would be a tremendous boon. With that thought, Kyi immediately patted his chest and promised to ensure that Sunan had a good pool of candidates. Chapter 62, Profiteering from Magic Stones. With the dual boosts of the super energy potion and the blood amber, Sunan's meditation progress surged forward, successfully constructing the 5th star ring by mid-month. His mental strength also broke through the 18 barrier smoothly. After 2 months, the duration of the super energy potion was approaching its end. Thus, Sunan synthesized another bottle of high-grade super energy potion and consumed it, further enhancing his meditation efficiency. By the end of the day, the proficiency of his star ring meditation method increased by nearly 700 points. To reach level 6 of the star ring meditation, I need 50,000 proficiency, so at this rate, it'll take at least another 2 months. However, once I construct the 6th star ring, my mental strength should be able to break through 20. Sunan focused his thoughts and summoned his status panel. Sunan Anist, human male, age 17. Mental strength 18.92/physical strength 14.21. Skills. Star ring meditation LV6, 21/50,000. Potion production LV3, 1804/6000. Biological modification LV2, 526/3000. Puppet refinement LV2, 2371/3000. Magic item manufacturing LV1, 251/1000. Aside from the star ring meditation, the skill that had grown the fastest among the remaining 4 was potion production, which had a significant lead in level. After all, Sunan was now producing potions daily, accumulating a stockpile to be delivered to the Firefox Trading Company for sale. This was his primary source of income. Following that was puppet refinement. He had been crafting dozens of black rock panthers each month, and recently, he had also created 10 clay golems, which had increased his proficiency considerably. Biological modification came next. The blood exchange plan for the invisible dragon was still ongoing, providing substantial proficiency for the skill each time. To date, the dragon's bloodline concentration had approached 40%. Sunan estimated that within 2 years, the invisible dragon's bloodline would evolve into a semi-dragon bloodline. It was worth noting that Sunan had considered extracting Amy's spatial traversal ability and replicating it onto the invisible dragon. After all, spatial traversal abilities synergized brilliantly with the abilities of intangibility and invisibility. Combined, these abilities could fundamentally transform the invisible dragon's combat power, elevating it several tiers. Even a legendary knight would find it hard to withstand the surprise attack of an invisible dragon that mastered spatial traversal. To this end, Sunan had even tempted Amy with synthesized frost mint, successfully persuading the little cat to cooperate with his experiments. Unfortunately, the results were regrettable. Multiple experiments had failed. Amy's ability for spatial traversal was ultimately not derived from her bloodline but awakened as a quasi-spell ability through the magical beast contract. This ability could not be inherited through blood, so even if he extracted Amy's blood and infused it into the invisible dragon, it wouldn't be possible to replicate or inherit. Sunan had to temporarily shelve this enticing idea. Although the spatial traversal ability is rare, there are indeed races in the multiverse that possess similar bloodline abilities. Once I become a wizard, perhaps I can find a way to capture one and extract its bloodline ability for the invisible dragon. Sunan pondered. Among the 4 skills, the slowest growing was magic item manufacturing. After all, aside from rune stones, he hadn't really crafted any proper magical items. Speaking of which, creating secondary magic stones should also help increase the skill's proficiency, right? An idea flashed in his mind. Both the magic item workshop and puppet factory required a magical crystal forging furnace, and the energy source for that was magic stones. Before he could forge the magical crystal furnace, he first needed to synthesize magic stones. Sunan turned and walked into the laboratory. With the clay golems tirelessly laboring, the base's foundation was already laid, and various building facilities were beginning to take shape. It was expected that the construction of the base would be completed in about 2 more months. After that, as long as various magical arrays and energy transmission pipelines were laid out, the base would be truly finished. Standing in front of the workbench, Sunan drew the magical array and placed an egg-sized crystal at its center. Despite the name, magic stones were actually a type of grey crystal. Thus, they were also referred to as magic crystals. To create secondary magic stones, a similar crystal needed to be used as a medium. As Sunan began to chant the incantation, the magical array glowed with light, elemental magical energy surged from the ley line node, flowing through the energy transmission pipes into the array, and finally coalescing into the crystal. After about 4 or 5 minutes, the crystal transformed from transparent to grey, emanating a peculiar glow. Sunan picked up the crystal and placed it into the synthesis cube. Secondary magic stone, purity 99.36%, contains a small amount of magical energy. Not bad, the purity is quite high. Sunan nodded with satisfaction, then proceeded to create more than 20 secondary magic stones, stopping only when the energy array he had drawn became ineffective, and he began synthesizing the magic stones. It wasn't until he placed the 15th secondary magic stone that the synthesis interface finally displayed the information for the magic stone. Magic stone, lower grade, a crystal containing abundant magical energy. The cost of creating secondary magic stones consisted only of the crystals and the materials for drawing the array. Each array could produce about 27 secondary magic stones. Ultimately, a single secondary magic stone would cost around 12 silver coins. A lower grade magic stone would thus cost about 180 silver coins, or less than 2 gold coins. It seems like in version 2.0 of the Wizard era, a lower grade magic stone can be exchanged for 50 to 60 gold coins in any country. If I calculate it this way, my production cost is practically a windfall. Sunan weighed the magic stone in his hand. Magic stones were products of elemental tides, rare minerals infused with magical energy. They were invaluable as spellcasting materials, tools for setting up magical arrays, and could also be used to extract energy to replenish mental strength, making them extremely versatile. Thus, wizards often treated magic stones as a form of hard currency. With the means to synthesize magic stones at a low cost, once the wizard era arrived, he could immediately transform into a wealthy magnate, buying up various resources and magical items. Just thinking about it thrilled him. Of course, that's assuming I can survive until then. Steadying his emotions, Sunan stored the magic stones and continued the synthesis process. A lower grade magic stone could sustain a magical crystal forging furnace for about an hour. Considering that the base would eventually have at least 2 magical crystal forging furnaces, he decided to stockpile 200 to 300 magic stones first. Unfortunately, my mental strength still isn't sufficient to open an elemental channel. Otherwise, if I could establish an elemental pool, I wouldn't need to consume so many magic stones. An elemental pool is a higher tier energy supply device. It can draw elemental energy from the elemental planes, providing a continuous and stable supply of infinite energy, far more efficiently than setting up energy transmission pipelines at ley line nodes. A small elemental pool could suffice to meet the basic needs of a wizard tower. However, establishing an elemental channel was something only a formal wizard could achieve, and Sunan could only sigh in longing for now. I'll just have to focus on synthesizing magic stones. Bringing his thoughts back to the task at hand, Sunan immersed himself in the synthesis of secondary magic stones. While Sunan was engrossed in creating magic stones, a unique recruitment event was unfolding throughout the entire shimmering territory. Chapter 63, The Test. Thump, thump, thump. Intense knocking shook the heavy wooden door. Inside the wooden house, Sherman, who was sleeping under a tattered quilt, was instantly awakened. Rubbing his eyes, he sleepily called out, "Coming." Mid-month of the revival moon, the weather was still quite chilly. Sherman put on his worn-out clothes, grabbed the leather coat that served as a second blanket, and opened the door. Outside, old Roger leaned against a carriage, holding a whip in one hand and puffing on his pipe with the other. "Hurry up, it's getting late. If you're late, you'll get scolded." "Got it." Sherman closed the wooden door, nimbly climbed onto the carriage, showing no signs of urgency. Roger glanced at him but said nothing. He cracked the whip sharply, and the old horse snorted as it pulled the carriage slowly forward. Sherman leaned against the carriage railing, glanced at the dark sky, and closed his eyes for a nap. Based on past experience, it would take about half an hour to reach the inner fort, and by then, the sky would be light. Sherman was an orphan. According to old Roger, he found Sherman on a snowy day, and because he had no children of his own, he took Sherman in and raised him. For years, Roger had worked hard collecting garbage for the nobles and disposing of it outside the city, raising Sherman to the age of 12 with great effort. Sherman felt deep gratitude towards Roger. Though he knew they weren't related by blood, Roger was like a father to him. Unconsciously, the carriage entered the inner city. A habit honed over time made Sherman automatically wake up. From a distance, he saw the majestic castle, his eyes brimming with envy and longing. That was where the lord and knights resided. Sherman had dreamed countless times of becoming a noble, living in a luxurious castle, enjoying a high and lavish life. Or perhaps becoming a powerful knight, earning the lord's favor, and becoming a guard, qualifying to live in the castle. In the boy's limited understanding, that castle was the most wonderful place in the world. But deep down, he knew that if not for his job, someone like him, a commoner, would never set foot in that castle in his lifetime, let alone live there. Upon waking, the dreams would vanish, leaving only the cold reality. Old Roger had told him that when he died, Sherman could inherit the 2 wooden houses and the carriage, taking over the job of cleaning garbage for the nobles. Sherman thought that was likely his future. The carriage stopped in front of the castle, and Sherman followed Roger off the carriage, heading towards the tall guards at the gate. Previously, when they entered the castle to clean garbage, they were often extorted by the guards and stewards, who demanded various benefits. However, since the previous lord was executed and the new lord took office, replacing the guards and stewards, they hadn't faced such extortion. This alone made Sherman have a favorable impression of the new lord he had never met. Over the past few months, the guards had become familiar with Roger and Sherman. Seeing them arrive, they conducted a simple check and allowed them through. Spending the entire morning, Roger and Sherman skillfully collected the garbage, loaded it onto the carriage, and prepared to transport it outside the city. Before leaving, one of the guards suddenly called out to Sherman, looked him up and down, and asked, "Little Sherman, how old are you this year?" Sherman was taken aback but answered truthfully, 12. "Can you read?" Sherman nodded. Commoners like him, working for the nobles, typically couldn't read, but Roger, having been an accounting apprentice for a shop in his youth, had learned to read before the shop closed. He then taught Sherman. Hearing this, the guard smiled and said, "Perfect. The Lord recently issued a decree that all youths aged 12 to 15 who can read, regardless of gender or background, must report to the testing center for a test. You should go there later." Test? What kind of test? Sherman was still in a daze, but Roger became anxious and quickly said, "Sir, little Sherman has always worked diligently, never done anything wrong." The guard waved his hand, chuckling, "Don't worry, it's a good thing. Lord Sunan is recruiting apprentices across the entire Shimmering territory. Those who pass the test can become his apprentices and receive a gold coin subsidy each month." Roger and Sherman were stunned, their faces full of shock. They worked hard all month for less than 10 silver coins. But becoming an apprentice meant earning a gold coin monthly? Was such a good thing possible? However, Roger hesitated. Was there really such a windfall in this world? Could it be a trick to lure people away for some nefarious purpose? Seeing Roger's expression, the guard knew what he was thinking and laughed. "Lord Sunan is a legendary wizard, and the decree was issued by the Lord himself. You think those two have nothing better to do than deceive a poor wretch like you? I wouldn't have bothered to remind you if I didn't see that little Sherman is a good kid." Roger quickly apologized with a smile. Thinking the guard made sense, after all, a decree from the Lord couldn't be false. Thanking the guard, Roger pulled Sherman onto the carriage. On the way back, Roger thought for a while and said to Sherman, "After we dump the garbage, clean yourself up, change your clothes, and go to the testing center." Sherman nodded vigorously, his eyes shining. If he could become an apprentice to Lord Sunan as the guard mentioned, he could earn a gold coin monthly, and in a year or two, he could take Roger to the inner city, open a small shop, and no longer have to clean garbage from dawn to dusk. Maybe he could even live in that castle. The thought filled Sherman with excitement, wishing he could sprout wings and fly to the testing center right then. Returning from outside the city, Sherman rushed home, washed up, changed into his best clothes, and headed straight to the place the guard mentioned. The testing center was set up at the border between the outer and inner city. In front of the temporarily erected wooden shed, hundreds of boys and girls around Sherman's age lined up. Many excitedly whispered to each other, occasionally peering towards the front of the line. Sherman noticed that these kids were all dressed neatly, at least in clean clothes, unlike his own faded, patched attire. It made sense, in these times, those who could read typically came from better-off families. Outliers like him were rare. "Line up at the end," no wandering. A nearby soldier noticed Sherman and instructed him to queue up. Sherman obediently went to the end of the line and waited quietly. Chapter 64, Mental Enlightenment. The boys in front of Sherman seemed to know each other and were engaged in a lively conversation. Lord Sunan is the Lord's brother. If we can become his apprentices, the future will be limitless. My cousin is a guard at the castle, and he says that even the knights highly respect Lord Sunan, and the Lord often seeks his advice. You don't know, do you? Lord Sunan is a wizard. A wizard? Like in the legends? Is that true? Of course, it's true. My father heard it himself at a noble's banquet. That's amazing. Wizard? Sherman blinked. He had been curious when the kind guard mentioned wizards. What exactly is a wizard? From the tone of these boys, it seemed to be something quite powerful. Unable to contain his curiosity, Sherman couldn't help but ask, "Excuse me, what's a wizard?" The boys turned to look at Sherman, and seeing him dressed in old clothes, a hint of disdain flashed in their eyes. The leading boy sneered, "You don't know? Wizards are greater than knights, able to control lightning and fire, and cast all sorts of magical spells." Control lightning and fire? Sherman was dumbfounded. Could someone really do such things in this world? That's incredible. So Lord Sunan was such an extraordinary figure. Seeing Sherman standing there in a daze, the boy who had spoken curled his lip disdainfully and turned back to continue chatting with his companions. As time passed, the line gradually moved forward. After about an hour, Sherman finally reached the front, able to clearly see the inside of the wooden shed. Inside, a long wooden table was set up, with a kindly-looking old man sitting behind it. Whenever a boy or girl approached, the old man would open a book for them to view. Most would show discomfort after only a few seconds, clutching their heads and groaning in pain. At that point, the old man would close the book and offer some comforting words before dismissing the tester. Clearly, these individuals were not passing the test. So far, only one boy and one girl had passed. The two stood beside the old man, appearing to be around 12 or 13 years old. The boy wore expensive-looking silk clothes, indicating noble lineage, and had a faint smile on his face. Despite trying to restrain himself, there was a hint of superiority in his gaze towards his peers. The girl's attire was less extravagant but clean and elegant, exuding an aura of scholarly knowledge. Sherman had sensed a similar aura from a scholar he once encountered, and he guessed she came from an educated family. While Sherman was observing, the boys ahead of him completed the test, all being eliminated. The three left the line dejectedly, standing aside with a reluctant air, seemingly wanting to see how others fared. When it was his turn, Sherman quickly stepped forward to the table. "Name?" the old man asked gently. "Sherman." The old man glanced at Sherman's clothes, slightly surprised. "You can read." "I've learned a bit," Sherman replied, nervously rubbing his hands. The old man smiled reassuringly, "No need to be nervous, relax." He handed Sherman a piece of paper. "Read the words on this." Sherman nodded, glanced at the paper, and saw familiar characters. He relaxed a bit, cleared his throat, and read aloud. "That's enough." The old man nodded approvingly, took back the paper, and opened the book, pushing it towards Sherman. It was a book with a hard, black cover, and the pages were filled with strange symbols, like gibberish, that made no sense. "Read this book. You might experience some discomfort, like headaches or chest tightness, but that's normal. Don't worry. If it becomes unbearable, stop reading and look away." Sherman couldn't hear the old man's warning anymore. The moment his eyes touched the book, he fell into a peculiar daze. The world seemed to quiet down instantly. Everything around him, whether objects or people, birds in the sky, or leaves falling mid-air, all appeared frozen in time. Looking around, Sherman was shocked to see that the table and the wooden pillars holding up the shed were covered in colorful tendrils. These tendrils were covered with countless eyes and swayed like jellyfish in the air. Looking down at the ground, the cracks in the stone tiles formed long fissures, opening and closing like mouths, repeating a single word in unison. "Truth. Truth. Truth." What was this? Sherman's face turned pale, his body trembling slightly. Never had he seen anything so bizarre. What was happening? Just as panic set in, the strange tendrils and mouths vanished without a trace. Sherman snapped back to reality, shocked to find the world had returned to normal. Everyone around him was watching with wide eyes, filled with envy and jealousy. Sherman looked down at the book on the table and realized he could now understand the previously unintelligible symbols. Congratulations, you've passed the test. The old man beamed, his demeanor noticeably warmer. Wait at the back for a while. Once the tests are done, I'll take you to meet Lord Sunan. No way, how did this guy get so lucky to pass the test? Such luck! How is it possible that I'm not as good as a commoner? The crowd buzzed with chatter and discussion. The boys who had been ahead of Sherman looked at him with envious eyes. Under the soldiers' calls, the crowd gradually quieted down. Still overwhelmed by the strange experience, Sherman only nodded dumbly at the old man's words, instinctively moving to the back. Are you all right? A pleasant voice reached his ears. Sherman looked up and met the clear gaze of the scholarly girl. She spoke softly, you saw those phenomena too, right? You all saw it. Sherman felt an inexplicable relief knowing he wasn't alone. Coming to his senses, he finally felt a surge of joy. He had passed the test. This meant he would receive a gold coin stipend each month. How wonderful! Chapter 65, 3 Apprentices. Seeing Sherman's ecstatic expression, the girl smiled and said, I'm Adil Yuri, and you? Sherman, he replied, looking at the other boy. The boy lifted his chin slightly and said indifferently, Corey McKinnon. Perhaps it was Sherman's humble attire, but Corey seemed to look down on him. After introducing himself out of politeness, he didn't engage Sherman further. On the other hand, Adil was warm and friendly, showing no signs of arrogance despite their differences in background. She's a kind girl, Sherman thought to himself. The testing finally concluded as the sky turned a faint yellow. Sherman was surprised to find that only he, Adil, and Corey had passed the test. Everyone else had been eliminated. This left Sherman with a sense of unexpected pride, feeling somewhat exceptional. Come with me, the old man said. He carefully wrapped the book in a fine cloth and tucked it into his chest before beckoning the three to follow him. Under his guidance, they entered the inner city and arrived at the castle gates. It seemed the old man held a high position, as the guards greeted him with respect. Sherman learned that the old man's name was Geller, a steward of the castle. The guard who had earlier advised Sherman looked at him in surprise, clearly not expecting him to have passed the test. Sherman returned a grateful smile, resolving to find a way to properly thank the guard later. Young Master Sunan is a good person and never scolds the servants. You don't need to be nervous when you meet him, old Geller reassured them as they walked. However, his words did little to ease their tension. All three appeared anxious. Sherman, in particular, was about to meet someone of great importance to him. Not being nervous would be strange. Even Adil and Corey had been repeatedly reminded by their families to show utmost respect to Lord Sunan and not to displease him. After winding through courtyards and corridors, Geller finally led them to a courtyard. The spacious yard was empty except for a small cat lazily sunbathing on a stone table in the center. Adil's eyes lit up slightly. What a cute cat! Sherman and Corey couldn't help but glance at it as well. What happened next left them stunned. Geller approached the cat, bowed respectfully, and said, Lord Amy, these are the new apprentices. I've brought them to meet young Master Sunan. Meow, Sunan is meditating in the meditation room. He'll be done in about half an hour. You can wait here for a while, Amy said, licking its paw and curiously observing the three. The trio stood there, dumbfounded. A talking cat. Were they dreaming? They instinctively looked at Geller, who coughed lightly and whispered, Lord Amy is, well, a friend of Lord Sunan. Mind your manners. Meow, come sit down, don't just stand there, Amy gestured with its paw. The three exchanged glances and reluctantly sat at the stone table. Geller placed the book and a roll of parchment on the table, bowed to Amy again, and left. In an instant, only the three of them and the cat remained in the courtyard. Meow, what are your names? Amy initiated a conversation, enthusiastically chatting with them. Sherman felt a bit out of place. He never imagined he'd be chatting with a cat one day. Fortunately, Amy seemed friendly, asking about fun places in Shimmering City and where to find delicious ice mint. Sherman couldn't contribute much, he had no idea what ice mint was. Corey and Adil, however, were more knowledgeable and could answer many of the questions, making Sherman feel both envious and self-conscious. Half an hour passed quickly. A door creaked open in the corridor. Meow, Sunan's out. The three immediately stood up reflexively, looking nervously toward the corridor. A figure soon emerged. To their surprise, instead of the young man in his 20s they expected, Sunan appeared much younger, barely looking 20 at all. Lord Sunan. They dared not look directly at him and quickly bowed. Sunan nodded slightly, saying nothing. He gestured, and the parchment on the stone table floated into his hand. Unrolling it, his expression shifted subtly. Corey McKinnon, the son of a lord. Adil Yuri, the daughter of a scholar. Sherman, a commoner's adopted son. The three represented the three classes of the Shimmering Territory. A remarkable coincidence. After reclaiming the Shimmering Territory, Key had ennobled three lords, Bread, Joden, and a knight named Starley McKinnon. Corey's father was the latter. The parchment detailed the entire testing process. The test lasted 7 days, with over 1,000 youths meeting the age and literacy requirements participating. Yet, only 3 passed the aptitude test. Sunan wasn't surprised by the results. Even in the golden age of wizards 1,000 years ago, those with wizard aptitude were rare, less than 1 in 1,000 of the population. With the declining energy particle concentration over the millennium, those with wizard aptitude would be even scarcer. Finding 3 qualified individuals in the entire Shimmering Territory was already beyond his expectations. He had hoped to find just 1. Of course, he couldn't predict how far these 3 would grow. Unless they demonstrated enough value, he wouldn't invest too many resources in training them. With a wave of his hand, 3 thick books appeared on the stone table, startling the children. This is the Star Ring meditation method, the key to becoming a wizard apprentice and what you'll be practicing for a while. Starting today, you'll live here. If you need anything in terms of food, clothing, or lodging, let the servants know. As long as it's reasonable, they'll accommodate your needs. Your only task is to focus on practicing the Star Ring meditation method. Once you master it, I'll accept you as my students. Understood. Sherman, Corey, and Adil were both surprised and delighted, responding in unison. They understood the difference between apprentices and students. Becoming Lord Sunan's students would undoubtedly brighten their futures. Satisfied, Sunan nodded and dismissed them. Training suitable assistants to maintain the base's facilities wasn't an easy task. The primary condition was that they needed to be at least wizard apprentices. Even a first-level wizard apprentice who hadn't constructed the first star ring would suffice. Without the ability to sense energy particles, much of the work couldn't proceed. Wizards weren't typically eager to spread knowledge. Most wizard mentors trained apprentices either to build their own forces for resource gathering or to find qualified assistants. Sunan wanted both. He planned to start now, gradually building a team. When the era of wizards arrived a millennium later, he might have established his own wizard faction. Achieving this required a critical first step, which was also the hardest. Sunan was mentally prepared for the challenge. Chapter 66, Base Completion. Time flew by, and it was now the month of thunder, April. The weather gradually became hotter, and the heat in the air made people feel a bit restless. However, Sunan was quite excited. The foundational construction of the base was finally complete. Upon receiving the news, he rushed back to the base to prepare for the final step. Laying the mana transmission conduits. If the earth node was the heart of the base, then the mana transmission conduits were its blood vessels. Only by laying a complete mana transmission system could the elemental magic from the earth node flow smoothly throughout the base, allowing all its facilities to function properly. There were various materials available for creating mana transmission conduits, and after much consideration, Sunan decided to use crystals. Crystals were the cheapest, had the best performance, and were the easiest mana transmission medium to produce artificially. Mana transmission conduits made from a large number of artificial mana crystals were known as crystal traces. Despite the low cost of crystals, the sheer size of the base meant that a significant amount of mana transmission conduits was required, resulting in substantial costs. To date, Sunan had invested over 10,000 gold coins into the base's construction. This was nearly equivalent to the annual income of the Shimmering Territory. He spent the past 2 months tirelessly making potions for the Firefox Trading Company and supplemented the rest with territory funds to gather this amount. As a result, his potion-making skill was now just shy of advancing to level 4, with less than 1,000 proficiency points needed. This is only the beginning. The subsequent construction of the magic plant garden will also require a lot of money, Sunan thought to himself. Wizards could earn money easily, but they also spent it just as extravagantly, like water flowing through their fingers. Sunan spent 2 whole days without rest, meticulously drawing the crystal traces throughout the base using the mage hand, melting each crystal into fine threads and etching them onto floors, walls, and ceilings with micro-level precision. As for the massive crystal serving as the central energy core, he placed it in the very center of the base in a dedicated room he named the Energy Central Room. Begin power supply. In the room's center, Sunan placed his hand on the central energy core and recited an incantation. A pale purple glow appeared on the surface of the giant crystal and quickly spread along the crystal veins outward. In Sunan's perception, a rich energy wave radiated from the room, spreading in all directions. Before long, the entire base was enveloped in this dense energy wave. It's done. A joyful smile appeared on Sunan's face. With this, the base was truly completed. Next, he only needed to refine the details of each area. Sunan took out the base's blueprint from the cube and looked at the various designated areas. Meditation area, spell training area, experimental area, residential area, pharmaceutical area, warehouse. Sunan even designated a detention area next to the experimental area to hold some experimental magical beasts in the future. If any enemies came knocking, they could also be detained there. These areas were considered ordinary areas and were relatively simple to set up, requiring only some borrowed manpower from Key to handle. Only the magic plant garden, workshop, and puppet factory needed his personal attention. The 2 monocrystal forges are ready to be moved into the workshop and puppet factory. But for the magic plant garden, I need to set up the power gathering arrays quickly and start planting the first batch of magical plants. Sunan had long decided what to plant first. Silver moon flowers were a definite choice. The super potions he was currently using required silver moon flowers as the primary material. They were currently indispensable. Moreover, if he intended to train a large number of apprentices in the future, he would need a significant supply of silver moon flowers to make lower-tier active potions and active potions. Instead of purchasing silver moon flowers from the Firefox Trading Company, growing them himself would be more cost-effective. Additionally, he could improve the silver moon flowers to cultivate superior varieties, which would be beneficial for crafting higher-tier potions later. The second magical plant Sunan chose to cultivate was the red vein fruit. This relatively common magical plant could slightly enhance physical constitution with long-term consumption. However, its effects were moderate. Consuming it consistently for 1 or 2 years might increase constitution by 1 or 2 points, with a long onset time, and it was only effective below the night level. Thus, red vein fruits were priced lower than silver moon flowers. Sunan intended to merge them with dragon keen blood to see if he could cultivate a more potent magical plant. Considering the planting and growth cycles, this would be a lengthy process. However, with the cube, Sunan was confident of success. As for daily maintenance, the clay golems can handle it. Producing 10 more clay golems, totaling 20, should be sufficient for the base's routine maintenance. For security, stone golems would serve well. In Sunan's vision, aside from future apprentices, no other humans would reside in the base. The base's daily maintenance and security would be entirely managed by golems. Too bad there's no tower spirit to control everything, otherwise, the base's operations could be automated. Tower spirits are the pinnacle of artificial intelligence. They manage wizard towers, handling integrated operations, including terminal computation, data recording, combat command, experimental assistance, and more. A single tower spirit could easily manage the automation of an entire base. Unfortunately, even the lowest grade tower spirits required legendary level soul crystals to create, which was beyond reach at this stage. 50 stone golems, combined with magical alarms, will make the base's defenses impenetrable. Over the past few months, Sunan had mastered 3 new first circle spells. These were Ray of Enfeeblement, Burning Hands, and Magic Alarm. The first 2 were offensive spells, while Magic Alarm was a highly practical auxiliary spell. The spell's effect was to designate a specific area. When any unmarked creature entered or touched the area, an alarm would be triggered. The alarm could be mental or auditory. The former would silently alert the caster or a designated creature. The latter would produce an audible sound, heard clearly by all creatures within the alert area. Sunan planned to set up permanent magical alarms throughout the base. With stone golems in the open and magical alarms hidden, the defense network would be complete. Even a legendary knight couldn't silently infiltrate the base. It would be ideal to create a steel golem as the base's ultimate defense. With a legendary knight level steel golem stationed, the base's security would be foolproof. Thanks to the rewards from my supporters, and the readers' votes, much appreciated. Chapter 67, Another Broad Path. The month of thunder passed like driftwood floating on a river, swirling away from people's sights. The weather began to grow increasingly hot. Not long after entering the month of budding flowers, Sunan successfully constructed the 6th star ring. As he had anticipated, his mental attribute also broke through the 20 mark. Sunan Anist, human male. Mental strength 20.36/constitution 15.45. Skills. Star ring meditation LV7, 21/80,000. Potion making LV4, 256/10,000. Biological modification LV2, 903/3000. Puppet crafting LV2, 2822/3000. Magic item manufacturing LV1, 502/1000. 80,000 proficiency points. It'll take over 3 months to upgrade. Sunan nodded to himself. One of the requirements for advancing to a level 3 wizard apprentice was to construct 9 star rings. He still needed 3 more. At the current pace, if all went smoothly, he could complete this in 2 to 3 years. After that, he would just need to increase his mental power. To boost my mental power, I'll just use the nightmare potion. The most crucial main material, the blood-stained mandrake, is already in hand. The remaining materials are being collected by the Firefox Trading Company, it's just a matter of time until I have everything. During this period of intensive potion making, Sunan's potion making skill had already reached level 4. With this level of potion making, he was now able to attempt crafting second-tier potions. Notably, as his skill leveled up, the success rate for making lower-tier active potions and lower-tier dragon blood potions had also risen significantly, now exceeding 40%. This increase in success rate further reduced potion costs and boosted profits, providing a much-needed respite for the financially strapped Sunan. The clay golems and stone golems have all been manufactured, so I don't need to spend too much time on golem crafting anymore. Sunan had completed the 10 clay golems and 50 stone golems needed for the base during this time. Additionally, he manufactured 30 extra clay golems for Key to help establish a logistics unit. I've placed orders for silver moonflower seeds and red vein fruits with the Firefox Trading Company. It will take some time for them to arrive. Sunan began to contemplate his next steps. Aside from practicing and studying spells, he had only 2 main tasks ahead. The first was to create steel golems. A steel golem weighed over 10 tons and needed to be made from at least an equal weight of pure steel. The better the quality of the steel used, the stronger the resulting steel golem would be. Sunan planned to use blackstone iron. Blackstone iron was lighter than fine iron of the same volume, allowing the steel golem to move more nimbly. However, the blackstone iron in the warehouse had just run out, so he would need to wait for new supplies from Blackstone City before he could begin crafting the steel golem. The second task was to create magic items. Sunan flipped his wrist, and a book appeared in his palm. Compendium of Low-Tier Magic Items. This book, left by Amy's master, contained over 100 alchemical and faint glow magic items, covering a wide variety. While he had several magic items on hand, they were all alchemical grade. He intended to craft a few faint glow magic items for himself, including at least one each of space type, attack type, and defense type. However, the difficulty of crafting faint glow magic items was significantly higher than that of alchemical grade items, and with his only level 1 magic item manufacturing skill, his success rate was likely to be quite low. Magic item manufacturing is less than 500 proficiency points away from leveling up. I should start by crafting some alchemical grade magic items for practice, which will also update my brother's equipment. Sunan headed to the workshop and retrieved a long sword from a nearby weapon rack. The rack held over 100 weapons, including swords, spears, and halberds, all requested from Key. He planned to use these weapons to try crafting magic-imbued weapons. Magic-imbued weapons were a significant category of alchemical-grade magic items. Their primary users were knights. Many wizards would create magic-imbued weapons for the knights who followed them, enhancing their combat power. Some wizards skilled in magic item crafting could even temporarily imbue their knights' weapons with magical properties during battle using silver, gold, and other metals. This technique was often referred to as temporary magic imbuement. Sunan estimated that he would need to elevate magic item manufacturing to at least level 4 to master this technique. Placing the sword on the workbench, Sunan began preparing the materials. Common materials for crafting magic items included various precious metals, gems, and magic stones. Depending on the properties of the magic item, some special materials might also be required. For example, crafting space-type magic items typically required star sand. Crafting staves generally needed mithril. Magic-imbued weapons were simpler, requiring only basic materials without any additional ingredients. As another alchemical-grade magic item, the difficulty of crafting magic-imbued weapons was lower than that of traditional magic items. Under the bright light, silver ingots, gems, and magic stones melted in Sunan's hands, forming fine threads as he wove them into the sword's surface, leaving behind strange patterns. A visible silver sheen gradually emerged from the sword's blade. The entire process took over 10 minutes. As the last pattern was inscribed, the silver threads broke away from Sunan's fingertips, and the sword glimmered with a mysterious aura. Not bad, my skills haven't rusted. A smile crept across Sunan's face as he placed the sword into the cube. Magic-imbued weapon, alchemical grade/minor magic item, possesses the black steel property, significantly increasing hardness, making it less prone to damage, and reducing wear on attached fighting energy. The properties of alchemical-grade magic-imbued weapons typically included black steel, sharpness, and blood light. The better ones might include minor elemental damage and energy gathering. The former could add minor elemental damage to the weapon. The latter could enhance the power of fighting energy. Generally, a magic-imbued weapon could only have one magical property attached. Only exceptionally skilled wizards could manage to imbue multiple properties into a single magic-imbued weapon. Of course, wizards at that level usually wouldn't bother with such tasks. With that time, why not craft a faint glow magic item instead? In addition to these properties, magic-imbued weapons had a characteristic that wasn't exactly a property. Due to the infusion of magical power, magic-imbued weapons had significantly enhanced compatibility with fighting energy compared to ordinary weapons. This was reflected in the reduced additional costs when attaching fighting energy. For this reason, even some failed magic-imbued weapons that couldn't attach properties remained popular among knights. By the way, can magic-imbued weapons with different properties be combined? An idea sparked in Sunan's mind. If it worked, could he potentially create a magic-imbued weapon with dozens of properties? With that thought, Sunan immediately began to experiment. Over the next period, he crafted over 20 magic-imbued weapons. The success rate was quite decent, averaging 3 successful attempts out of every 5. Each success yielded about 20 points of proficiency, and even failures provided 7 to 8 points. After crafting more than 20 magic-imbued weapons, his magic item manufacturing skill successfully reached level 2. However, Sunan was disappointed to find that magic-imbued weapons with different properties could not be combined. That makes sense, magic-imbued weapons with different properties are essentially different items, so it's not surprising they can't be merged. Magic-imbued weapons with the same properties, however, could be combined. The resulting magic-imbued weapon would have enhanced effects. For instance, Sunan used 3 long swords with sharpness properties to create a long sword with a armor-piercing property, easily breaking through the defenses of finely crafted armor with a single strike. Although the rank remained unchanged as alchemical grade, the sword's power was already on par with traditional magic items like the blood vine ring and the magic coin. Since magic items with the same properties can be combined, I can definitely use alchemical grade magic items to synthesize faint glow magic items or even magic artifacts. Materials for faint glow magic items were generally rare and difficult to find. The materials for magic artifacts were even harder to come by. In contrast, the materials for alchemical grade magic items were much more common. If he could synthesize faint glow magic items or even magic artifacts using alchemical grade items, it would undoubtedly save him a lot of effort. Sunan's spirits lifted as he felt he had discovered yet another broad path. Chapter 68, Changes. In Shimmering City, within the inner fortress, Sherman sat cross-legged on the floor of the tranquil meditation room, his eyes closed. Invisible energy particles floated in the air, drawn into his body as if by an unseen force, disappearing without a trace. After about half an hour, Sherman opened his eyes and let out a long breath. Standing up, he opened the door and stepped outside, gazing at the greenery in the courtyard. A sense of daze crossed his face. Since the day he took the test, his life had undergone drastic changes. The dream he had fantasized about for over a decade had come true in one day. He now lived in the castle he had always longed for, enjoying the service of servants like a noble, and received a gold coin each month. During this time, Sherman had returned home once and heard old Roger say that after he moved into the castle, many people came to inquire about him, bringing gifts to curry favor with old Roger. When he mentioned this, old Roger couldn't stop smiling, praising Sherman for his success. Seeing Old Roger's joyful and content expression made Sherman happy as well. However, what excited and amazed him the most was the knowledge imparted by Lord Sunan. Now he should call him teacher. A fascinating knowledge called meditation. After 25 days, Sherman successfully entered the star ring meditation method and felt energy particles for the first time. Since then, he felt as though he had entered a whole new world. In just 2 months of meditation, he had transformed from a frail little boy into a strong youth. His once thin body, where even the ribs were visibly protruding, had visibly grown robust. According to Lord Amy, he now possessed the physical qualities of a sword-wielding squire. The blacksmith Carlo from the Hammer Forge in the north had often boasted in front of him about being a former squire. Would Carlo be shocked to learn that a 12-year-old boy like Sherman already had the strength of a squire? Sherman suddenly found himself wanting to see that reaction. However, that was just a thought, he didn't have the luxury of time to pursue it. After entering the star ring meditation method, Lord Sunan officially accepted him as a student, subsequently providing him with a large stack of books to study diligently, stating that he would be tested on his learning progress every month. If Lord Sunan was satisfied, he would receive rewards. To be honest, the contents of those books were quite complicated and unfamiliar. Books like Basics of Magical Plants, Magical Plant Cultivation, Basics of Potion Making, Biology, Mutation Studies, Principles of Spells, and Origins of Wizards left Sherman feeling dizzy. Although he could read, his literacy level was only sufficient for everyday tasks, making it quite difficult for him to tackle these dense texts. To keep up with the pace, he had to sneak off to ask Lord Amy for help, which required him to give her a half-hour massage every day. While Sherman was lost in thought, the door down the hallway suddenly opened, and Adil stepped out. Seeing Sherman, she smiled gently and said, "Just finished meditating?" "Yes." Sherman glanced at the book Adil was holding, feeling a bit nervous as today was the day of their monthly assessment. In a little while, Lord Sunan would come to test their learning progress for the month. He always felt a sense of anxiety during these times. Noticing Sherman's unease, Adil softly reassured him, "Don't be nervous. You've been working hard studying, you'll be fine." While others might not know, Adil was well aware of how diligent Sherman had been. She and Corey would occasionally take breaks due to the tedious nature of studying, but she had never seen Sherman take a break. Every time she saw Sherman, he was engrossed in his studies. This level of focus and relentless effort made Adil secretly admire him. While Sherman might not be as efficient in learning as she or Corey, he certainly kept pace with them. "Thank you," Sherman said, grateful as he nodded to Adil. Just then, Corey walked out from the other side of the hallway. Spotting Adil and Sherman standing in the corridor, he paused, glancing over Sherman with a barely perceptible frown before nodding to Adil and walking toward the courtyard without saying a word. Seeing this, Sherman couldn't help but smile wryly. Corey had always looked down on him due to his commoner status, and since Sherman had entered the star ring meditation method 2 days earlier, Corey seemed even more displeased. It was as if competitive feelings had been ignited, and every time Lord Sunan assessed their knowledge, Corey would adopt a competitive demeanor, leaving Sherman feeling both amused and exasperated. "Don't mind him. Corey isn't a bad person, he just has a strong competitive streak," Adil whispered. Sherman nodded in understanding. He had encountered far worse noble brats, and compared to them, Corey was quite decent. At least Corey didn't insult him directly as a little bastard or a commoner. Noticing that the time was nearing, Adil and Sherman stood at the courtyard entrance, waiting for their teacher. Before long, footsteps echoed from afar, drawing closer. Soon, Sunan's figure appeared in sight. "Teacher." Sherman, Corey, and Adil quickly bowed in greeting. Sunan extended his mental perception, scanning the three of them with a subtle nod. "It seems that all three of you have kept up with your meditation practice lately. Good." With Sunan's praise, the three of them beamed with joy. "Meow, Sunan is here." Amy suddenly appeared from somewhere and leaped onto Sunan's shoulder, the bell around her neck jingling lightly and producing a pleasant chime. The three students calmly observed this scene. Initially shocked by Amy's ability to teleport, they had grown accustomed to it over time. However, there was another presence that they had yet to acclimate to. Just as they were thinking about it, a massive figure appeared silently before them, with dark red scales and sharp claws glinting in the sunlight, radiating a chilling aura. The primal and savage presence made Sherman and the others instinctively tense up. By truth, they had never seen such a terrifying beast before. When they first laid eyes on the hidden dragon, they almost fell to the ground in shock. The hidden dragon ignored the three kids, letting out a low hiss as it approached Sunan. Sunan stroked the rough head of the hidden dragon and smiled, "Have you been outside the city again?" "Hiding dragon, hiss. Amy, meow, I'm not scared to go out alone. I just brought you along because I thought you were bored staying here." "Hiding dragon, hiss. Amy, what's so good about sleeping? You're not really a dragon, why do you lie around all day?" Sunan chuckled, interrupting the back and forth between the cat and the lizard. "The base outside the city is already built. I've prepared a place for you to stay there, it's more spacious, and you can move over." Upon hearing this, the hidden dragon had no objections. Amy glanced at Sherman and the others, "Meow, what about them?" Sunan looked at the three students and said, "Once they finish their studies as I instructed, they can move into the base." After a moment of hesitation, Amy shook her head, "Then I'll stay here for now, meow." Sunan looked deeply at Amy and nodded without saying more. After awakening from a millennium-long slumber, Amy had lost all her friends and companions in this world, leaving her almost alone. Aside from Sunan and the hidden dragon, only Sherman, Corey, and Adil, the three new wizard apprentices, could barely be considered part of her circle, allowing for some interaction. Thus, in Sunan's frequent absences due to his busy schedule, Amy preferred to spend time with the three of them. Chapter 69, The Plague. In the study, Sunan set down the book in his hands and nodded slightly. "Good job, all three of you have passed." At these words, Sherman, Corey, and Adil, who were standing in front of the desk, let out a collective sigh of relief. "This is your reward." With a wave of his hand, 3 bottles of lower-tier active potions floated before the trio. "This is a lower-tier active potion. It can enhance your mental alertness, improve meditation efficiency, and boost your learning capabilities. Each bottle lasts for a month." Sherman and the others were thrilled, their eyes shining as they looked at the potions in their hands. According to the book's description, real wizard potions, even at the lowest tier, had effects that ordinary people could hardly imagine. Moreover, a potion that improved meditation efficiency was incredibly valuable for wizard apprentices. "Keep up the good work. If you pass next month's knowledge assessment, there will be more rewards," Sunan encouraged them before waving his hand for them to leave. "These 3 little ones are making good progress in their studies. In particular, Sherman. I initially thought his background would hinder his learning ability compared to the others, but he hasn't fallen behind at all. This kid seems to have some potential," Sunan thought, a smile crossing his face. At this rate, in about 6 months, the 3 of them should be able to take on some responsibilities at the base. Leaving the courtyard, Sunan headed straight for the training ground. As expected, Ki was indeed training in the arena. Fred, Joden, and the others were also present. Due to the need to stabilize their forces and supply the Blackstone cavalry with lower-tier dragon blood potions, Ki hadn't asked Sunan to make any potions for him in the past 6 months. Therefore, he was still a junior knight and showed no signs of breaking through at this time. However, being a 21-year-old junior knight was impressive in any nation. Fred and Joden had both consumed dragon blood potions once. The former was showing signs of breaking through to become a knight, while the latter had just recently advanced to peak knight 3 months ago. Noticing Sunan's arrival, Ki immediately stopped training, took a towel from a servant to wipe his sweat, and smiled, "What brings you here today?" "I have something for you." Ki's eyes brightened instantly, and he asked eagerly, "What is it?" Fred and Joden also showed curious expressions. After all, whatever Sunan brought out was always something extraordinary. Under the eager gazes of the others, Sunan produced a long sword out of thin air. The silver blade gleamed brightly in the sunlight, and the mysterious patterns on the blade sparkled with an unusual luster. "This is a magic-imbued weapon." Sunan approached a training dummy made of iron and struck down with the sword. Everyone felt a flash before their eyes, and the next second they heard a thud as the iron dummy was cleaved diagonally from the shoulder to the waist, the top half crashing to the ground. "What the?" Ki inhaled sharply. As a seasoned sword user, he could tell just how exquisite the sword in Sunan's hand was. The iron dummy was forged from Blackstone iron, known for its high hardness. Typically, ordinary swords would at most leave a mark on it. But under the slash of this sword, it broke apart like tofu. This demonstrated its astonishing sharpness. Normally, a sword with such sharpness would have a smooth and even cut, yet this one had a rough edge with signs of melting. This clearly indicated that the sword also had effects akin to fire damage. This sword is imbued with the properties of armor-piercing and minor fire elemental damage. In addition to its exceptional sharpness compared to ordinary weapons, it also inflicts minor fire damage when attacking, Sunan explained as he retrieved the sword. This was the result of successfully creating a magic-imbued weapon after solidifying the armor-piercing property and then adding the minor fire elemental damage after 3 failures. It was the best magic-imbued weapon he had crafted so far. This was also possible because magic item manufacturing had reached level 2, otherwise, it would have likely been unsuccessful. Currently, solidifying 2 properties at once was the limit of what Sunan could achieve. To do more would require raising magic item manufacturing to a higher level. Nonetheless, Qi was already enamored with the sword. As he excitedly examined it, he couldn't help but marvel at it inwardly. No doubt, this weapon would significantly enhance a knight's combat power. With this sword in hand, he felt confident enough to challenge a mid-level knight. Meanwhile, Brett and Jodin looked on enviously at the weapon Qi held. Seeing their expressions, Sunan tossed each of them a magic-imbued weapon as well. Brett received a shield imbued with the properties of black steel and energy gathering, making it exceptionally sturdy while enhancing the power of fighting energy. Jodin got a long sword imbued with sharpness and minor fire elemental damage. With their new magic-imbued weapons, Brett and Jodin were thrilled and repeatedly thanked Sunan. "Can this kind of weapon be manufactured in bulk?" Qi asked excitedly. Sunan shook his head slightly, "Not for your type, but slightly lesser ones, just solidifying one property, can be manufactured in bulk." "What about the cost?" Qi asked immediately. He was particularly sensitive to this topic now. Shimmering Territory was not only looking to expand its military forces but also needed to support Sunan's base construction, and economic pressure remained quite significant. "About 20 gold coins each," Sunan replied. This was because the magic stones had been synthesized by him, keeping costs low. Otherwise, based on market value, if there was one, the cost of a magic-imbued weapon would be at least 80 gold coins or more. Qi breathed a sigh of relief at this. "That's not too bad, 20 gold coins isn't especially excessive. A common fine iron longsword costs 3 to 4 gold coins, so it's reasonable for a magic-imbued weapon to cost several times more. That said, equipping all the knights in the territory with a magic-imbued weapon would still require several thousand gold coins, another significant expense." Qi glanced at the weapon in his hand, beginning to ponder whether this could open a new trade route. Seeing the change in his demeanor, Sunan guessed his intentions and doused his enthusiasm by saying, "Selling them externally is out of the question, I don't have that much time to spend on manufacturing magic-imbued weapons." Qi felt a bit disappointed but understood Sunan's reasoning. It would be a waste to have a wizard apprentice working as a blacksmith. After considering it, he decided to first equip the knights in the territory with a magic-imbued weapon. Sunan nodded in agreement and handed over the magic-imbued weapons he had crafted recently, including the failed ones, for Qi to distribute. With that settled, as Sunan was about to leave, he turned and noticed Qi's secretary rushing into the training ground, handing Qi a scroll of parchment. Qi opened it, his brow immediately furrowing. "What happened?" Sunan stopped and asked. Qi took a deep breath and said in a serious tone, "A plague has broken out in the Frostflower province." Chapter 70, Seed Improvement and Selection. The Starry Principality has 7 major provinces. The Golden Rock province is located at the northernmost part of the principality, bordering the Hullen province to the southwest, and beyond that lies the Frostflower province. "What kind of plague is it?" Sunan asked. Qi said nothing more and handed over the parchment. Sunan took it, and his brow furrowed upon reading. It turned out that a month ago, a strange illness suddenly emerged in Silver Ridge City of the Frostflower province. Infected individuals would gradually develop beast-like fur, claws, and sharp teeth, along with other animalistic traits, and they would attack others in a frenzy, displaying an intense craving for flesh. Initially, the Lord of Silver Ridge City did not take it seriously, sending soldiers to kill the infected and hastily bury them. However, the situation did not end there, as more infected individuals soon appeared within the city. In just a month, the number of infections in Silver Ridge City surpassed 500, and it was rapidly increasing. With the situation escalating, the local military could no longer handle it alone. Reluctantly, the Lord of Silver Ridge City had to seek help from the Marquis of Frostflower. The Marquis has already dispatched troops to suppress the frenzied infected individuals. After reading the contents of the parchment, Sunan couldn't help but grimace in pain. This was nothing but beastization syndrome. Beastization syndrome, rather than being a simple disease, was more akin to a reversion phenomenon. Those infected with beastization syndrome would have their beastization factors activated completely, leading their bodies to manifest various animal traits, losing their rationality and becoming bloodthirsty beasts. However, the only way to spread beastization syndrome was through the original beastized humans. Original beastized humans refer to the first generation of beastized humans and the next generations that descended from them. For instance, the beastized guard Oda next to Mu Zhu of the Firefox Trading Company was clearly an ordinary beastized human. In ancient times, original beastized humans caused the beastization disaster, leading to massive casualties until they were ultimately suppressed by the wizards. Since then, the wizards recognized the threat posed by original beastized humans and eliminated them all. Logically, there should have been no original beastized humans left on Starlight Continent, so how could there be an outbreak of beastization syndrome? Sunan pondered this in confusion. This is beastization syndrome. Sunan returned the parchment. Seeing Key's puzzled expression, he had to explain in detail what beastization syndrome was. Upon hearing this, Key's expression grew particularly solemn. Are the infected individuals difficult to deal with? It depends on the physical condition of the infected. If they are just ordinary people, then after infection, they might only reach the level of a squire at most. However, if they are squires or knights, it becomes much more troublesome. Beastization syndrome can be severe or mild. If the source of infection can be found quickly to control the spread, and all the infected individuals are cleared, the situation can be resolved swiftly. But if it's not managed well, it could lead to disaster. Sunan shook his head. Key furrowed his brow even tighter, sighing, I hope the Frost Flower Province can gain control of the situation quickly. Sunan pursed his lips, not overly worried. The Frost Flower Province was separated from the Shimmering Territory by the Hulun Province. Even if a full-blown beastization disaster occurred there, it would primarily be a headache for the Marquis of Frostflower and the nearby marquises. Not for him to worry about. Time passed quickly, and it was now the month of Summer Grove. The Firefox Trading Company had finally delivered the seeds for silver moon flowers and red vein fruits. The construction of the magical plant garden could finally proceed. However, before planting, Sunan needed to improve the seeds of the silver moon flowers and red vein fruits. The former was relatively simple. Synthesis. Using the basic silver moon flower seeds, he aimed to produce a more improved variety. Of course, synthesis wasn't limitless. While theoretically, as long as there were enough silver moon flower seeds, Sunan could continually upgrade them. The problem was that the better the variety, the more demanding the growth environment. If the synthesized silver moon flowers were too superior, even with the energy particle concentration from the magical plant garden, it might not meet their growth requirements. Thus, Sunan's task was to find a version of the seeds that perfectly matched the energy particle concentration of the magical plant garden. This process was not too difficult. It involved planting different synthesized seeds and comparing their growth performance to select the best one. After approximately 2 months, Sunan finally selected the most suitable superior variety. The improvement process for the red vein fruit was much more complicated and lengthy. It required first merging the red vein fruit seeds with dragon keen blood, then planting them to obtain improved red vein fruit seeds before synthesis could take place. Otherwise, merging seeds one by one would exhaust Sunan. Even with the energy gathering formations improving the growth environment, the growth cycle of red vein fruits still took 3 months. Adding the time spent researching the fusion, it took Sunan 4 months to harvest the first batch of seeds, naming them dragon blood fruits. Next was the repetitive selection process for the final chosen dragon blood fruit seeds. When Sunan finally planted the selected dragon blood fruit seeds, it was already nearing the end of the year in the month of Autumn Vale. The weather had turned cold. Fortunately, the magical plant garden had a constant temperature formation, so there was no need to worry about climate effects. Looking at the densely planted silver moon flowers and dragon blood fruit seedlings in the magical plant garden, Sunan let out a sigh of relief, feeling a sense of accomplishment. From now on, he wouldn't need to spend large amounts of gold coins purchasing silver moon flowers. The material issue for super potions was temporarily resolved. The same went for the substitutes for lower-tier dragon blood potions. Once the first batch of dragon blood fruits was harvested, he could address the potion supply shortage. Stretching his limbs, Sunan turned to leave the magical plant garden. The base was quiet. Since Sunan was the only one present, it remained calm most of the time. Occasionally, the dull footsteps of clay golems could be heard as they cleaned the base. Since Sherman and the others were not yet capable of handling things on their own, Sunan took it upon himself to oversee the planting and cultivation of the silver moon flowers. As a result, he had become even busier over the past few months. He hadn't yet managed to forge the steel golem. The black stone iron delivered from Shimmering City was still piled up in the warehouse. However, Sunan had not neglected meditation and spell training for a single day. He had successfully constructed the 7th star ring, taking another step closer to advancing to a level 3 wizard apprentice. His mental strength had also increased to 22.12. However, the proficiency for the 8th level star ring meditation method had spiked to 130,000 points. He still needed over 20,000 proficiency points to upgrade again. More than 20,000 proficiency points should take about a month. However, given this trend, the proficiency for the 9th level star ring meditation method may reach 200,000, which means it would take at least 7 to 8 months to upgrade. Sunan estimated the time, finding it was roughly in line with his previous predictions. If all went well, by the end of next summer or the beginning of the month of fire flow, he would be able to construct the 9th star ring. Chapter 71, Level 1 Summoning Helper Spell. In the puppet factory, a deep rumbling echoed endlessly. The massive monocrystal forging furnace vibrated violently, and the closed lid emitted a fiery orange glow from the gaps. The entire factory was filled with a scorching atmosphere, with temperatures so high that even a squire would struggle to endure for long. Sunan, however, was unfazed, calmly standing at the workbench. On the spacious workbench lay the completed shell of a steel golem. The black metallic body was covered with dense magical runes. As Sunan placed the soul crystal into the recess in the golem's chest, a silver light rapidly spread along the runes, flowing throughout its body like light. The next second, the steel golem suddenly sat up, leaped off the workbench, and landed heavily on the ground, standing tall in front of Sunan. Sunan surveyed the golem's imposing physique and nodded in satisfaction. A steel golem made from black stone iron is indeed superior to one made from ordinary steel. Even against Hodge, this steel golem would be more than capable of winning. A qualified steel golem, in addition to being virtually indestructible and immensely powerful, possessed dark vision, immunity to all mental effects, immunity to poison, sleep, paralysis, confusion, suffocation, and more. It remained unperturbed by pain and fearless of death. It also had high resistance to most elemental damage. For example, it could withstand fire burns, lightning paralysis, dark curses, and shadow erosion, among others. It was truly a battle behemoth. Even within the wizard's tower of a formal wizard, a steel golem could rank among the mid to high tier guards. For Sunan's currently developing base, it was more than sufficient to serve as the ultimate guardian. As for higher tier golems, he currently lacked the required soul crystals, and his puppet crafting level was insufficient as well. The steel golem is indeed an excellent guardian, but the key materials for its creation are rather hard to find. In addition to the metallic materials forming its body, the steel golem also required silver, gold, and crystals to inscribe the enchanted runes. Ultimately, the total cost was close to 800 gold coins. And that was without accounting for the value of the soul crystal. If the soul crystal were included, the cost of a steel golem would easily exceed 1,000 gold coins. I currently don't have a second soul crystal, so I can't forge a second steel golem in the short term. Alternatively, I could try using gemstones as the core for the soul, creating a lower performance truncated version of the steel golem and then synthesizing it. An idea sparked in Sunan's mind. If this worked, he could create steel golems even without soul crystals. However, doing so would consume a significant amount of black stone iron. Or I could use a gemstone-made soul core for synthesis to see if it can replace the soul crystal. Regardless, it's worth a try. I should add it to the agenda. Sunan quickly added this plan to his schedule. The schedule outlined his daily plans. Meditation, potion making, forging black stone leopards and golems, cultivating magical plants, blood transfusions for the hidden dragon, and crafting magic-imbued weapons. His days were nearly filled to the brim. Fortunately, wizards could substitute meditation for sleep and didn't require rest, otherwise, he truly wouldn't be able to keep up. At least those 3 little ones have learned quite a bit. In a few days, I can arrange for them to move into the base. I can assign them simple tasks like cultivating magical plants and extracting silver moon flowers, which will free up my time to create magic items. Due to his busy schedule, his plan to manufacture faint glow magic items had yet to be initiated. Speaking of which, the materials I requested from the Firefox Trading Company should be arriving soon. It's worth mentioning that there were no spell studies on his schedule because, over the past 6 months, Sunan had mastered all the first circle spells available to him. These included Magic Disguise, 7-Colored Aura, Featherfall, Level 1 Summon Monster, Silent Illusion, and Comprehend Languages. So far, he had mastered a total of 12 first circle spells. For a Level 2 wizard apprentice who had only been promoted for less than 2 years, this amount of spells was quite impressive. However, after this point, Sunan had no more first circle spells available to learn. Although the Firefox Trading Company was gradually collecting various books for him, the number of spell books was scarce, and those that were available were mostly zero circle spells. More than half of the first circle spells Sunan had mastered came from the spellbooks left behind by Amy's master. Indeed, becoming prosperous relies on wizard heritage. Sunan recalled the Starry Continent's 3 major wizard heritages, particularly the Tower of Stars. He wondered where the Tower of Stars could be located. By the way, both the Tower of Stars and the Starry Principality have star in their names. Is there any connection between the two? After pondering for a moment without arriving at a conclusion, Sunan shook his head and decided not to dwell on it, instead focusing on another issue. The base is too large, even with 3 apprentices joining, many areas still lack personnel. I need to find some additional helpers. Sunan had already formulated a solution for this issue. Moreover, it happened to relate to the 2 first circle spells he had recently mastered. That was Level 1 Summon Monster and Comprehend Languages. Level 1 Summon Monster, known among wizards as the Level 1 Summoning Helper spell. Many wizards use this spell to summon otherworldly creatures to assist them in experiments or manage their bases. After all, compared to investing significant time and effort in training apprentices, summoning otherworldly beings is undoubtedly much quicker and more convenient. However, this method isn't without its challenges. First, the summon targets of the Level 1 Summon Monster spell are uncertain. The variety of otherworldly creatures is vast, and over 99% of them won't meet a wizard's requirements. To summon suitable otherworldly beings, one would typically need to try hundreds or even thousands of times to achieve success. Secondly, there's the issue of language communication. During the spell's effect, the caster can communicate with the summoned creature through telepathy, eliminating any communication barriers. However, if the goal is to have the otherworldly being stay, communication must be resolved. Fortunately, this is manageable, as Comprehend Languages was prepared for this purpose. With this spell, communicating with otherworldly beings will not be an issue. Furthermore, Sunan could create a permanent magic item with the Comprehend Languages spell to equip the summoned creatures, ensuring there would be no communication barriers. Lastly, there's the contract issue. To turn an otherworldly creature into a helper, one must ensure it won't betray. In a more profound sense, loyalty is crucial. Thus, signing a contract becomes the only choice. Even if it's not a slave-type blood contract, it must at least be a cooperative oath contract. How to persuade otherworldly beings to sign a contract is something wizards must consider. Of course, if one is ruthless enough, they could use violence to force the otherworldly being to sign a blood contract. There have even been cases of wizards using this spell to summon otherworldly beings as experimental materials, leading to the Level 1 Summon Monster spell also being nicknamed the Level 1 Resource Summon. However, the downsides of this approach are evident. Under the influence of the summoning rules of the otherworld, there will likely be no response from otherworldly beings to these wizards' summons in the future. I also have magic coins, which can also summon otherworldly beings, and they can be used in conjunction with Level 1 Summon Monster. Hopefully, I can summon a few useful helpers. Sunan added this new plan to his schedule as well. Chapter 72, Tour of the Base. In the back courtyard of Shimmering City, shouts and commands filled the air, creating a bustling atmosphere. Move faster, unload everything. Be careful. If you break anything, I'll deduct it from your pay. Separate the marked items, I'll personally take them to the outskirts later. Mu Zhu shouted instructions to his subordinates, occasionally barking out reprimands. Given his status, he didn't need to personally accompany the delivery team. However, to show his commitment to the Shimmering territory, he made it a point to lead the team every time. Thinking back to his first meeting with Sunan at the tavern, Mu Zhu couldn't help but feel a wave of nostalgia. Although he had sensed Sunan was no ordinary person and that his future was bright, he hadn't anticipated just how impressive and remarkable Sunan would become. As one of the most prominent merchants in the Jinhua Principality, He had his own information channels and was well aware of the crucial role Sunan played during the campaign to retake the Shimmering territory. To put it bluntly, without Sunan, Blackstone City wouldn't have been able to stage a comeback, it would have collapsed during that assassination incident. Sunan had practically single-handedly reversed the balance of power. While Muzhu had heard many secrets about wizard apprentices, it was his first time realizing just how powerful a wizard apprentice could be. Naturally, he sought to cultivate a good relationship with someone so promising. Moreover, Sunan's collaboration with the trading company had brought in considerable profits through his potions. After unloading the goods, Muzhu delegated other matters to his assistant and personally led the team and cargo to the base on the outskirts. Oda, his beastized bodyguard, followed closely behind, sharing the same cart. Once aboard the cart and lowering the door curtain, Muzhu casually asked, "No news from the Frostflower province yet?" Oda shook his head with a solemn expression. "No, I've sent several letters, but the people there haven't replied." "That's strange. The beastized individuals in the Frostflower province have been living well, why would they actively spread beastization syndrome?" Muzhu pondered, stroking his chin. Oda replied darkly, "It shouldn't be them, only original beastized humans can transmit beastization syndrome. We descendants can't do that. I suspect there's more to this." Muzhu remained noncommittal, thinking for a moment before saying, "After we deliver the goods, you should go to the Frostflower province to investigate what's happening. If the situation is too dire, the trading company will have to consider scaling back its investments there." "I understand," Oda nodded solemnly. The two then fell silent, and the cart soon descended into quiet. Suddenly, a commotion erupted outside. Curious, Muzhu lifted the curtain to look out and saw 3 pitch-black leopards racing down the street, drawing the attention of passers-by. Blackstone leopards. Muzhu immediately recognized the source of the panthers. Since the Battle of Blackstone City, the reputation of the Blackstone cavalry had spread throughout the Golden Rock province. Many people knew that this cavalry had powerful mounts known as Blackstone leopards, each possessing knight-level combat power and unmatched bravery, even surpassing the best war horses. Much of the Blackstone cavalry's fame stemmed from the Blackstone leopards. Many noble lords coveted them. Muzhu had once tried to gauge Key's intentions about purchasing Blackstone leopards but was firmly rejected. However, what surprised Muzhu wasn't just the leopards but the 3 children riding them. 2 boys and a girl, all around 13 or 14 years old. Who are these 3? Muzhu wondered to himself. Given their age, they couldn't possibly be from the Blackstone cavalry, yet they were able to ride Blackstone leopards, indicating they held a significant status in Shimmering City. Suddenly, Muzhu recalled something. He had heard that Sunan had taken in 3 apprentices earlier this year. Could these be those 3 kids? Whoosh! The wind whistled past, and the scenery blurred by. Sherman, filled with excitement, rode on the back of a Blackstone leopard, experiencing his first exhilarating ride, feeling his blood rush. Beside him, Corey also showed his excitement, his eyes sparkling. Only Adil appeared slightly pale, not quite accustomed to the rapid pace. Before long, the 3 arrived at the base. "Is this the base that the teacher mentioned?" Sherman curiously examined the towering stone walls and the tightly closed gates. Upon closer inspection, he noticed shallow, peculiar patterns on the surface of the stone walls. He vaguely recognized these patterns from the books he had seen. They seemed to be enchantment runes for enhancing the hardness of objects. Boom! Suddenly, the heavy gates swung open, and a familiar figure dashed out from within, appearing in front of the 3 children in an instant. It was Amy. "Meow, you finally made it. I've been waiting for you for a long time." Amy waved to the 3. "Come in quickly, Sunan is busy. Let me show you around the base first so you can get familiar with it." Under Amy's guidance, Sherman and the others stepped into the base, feeling a bit nervous. Once inside the gates, they noticed 2 massive rock creatures standing guard. "Stone golems!" Adil gasped. She had seen illustrations of stone golems in books but had never encountered one in real life. Sherman and Corey stared wide-eyed at the stone golems, filled with wonder. "These are the base's guards, meow," Amy explained. Just then, a team of clay golems walked by, seemingly heading out of the base. Amy glanced back and said, "A merchant convoy is delivering goods, they need to help with the transport. Come on, let's keep going." With that, she bounced ahead, and Sherman and the others quickly followed. Amy was very diligent, explaining the purpose of each area they visited. This is the meditation area, you can meditate here. Just pick any empty meditation room. This is the spell training area. Do you see those humanoid targets? Once you learn spells, you can practice here. This is the experimental area, where experiments are conducted. And this is the residential area, your future living quarters. This is the potion making area. The base was impressively large. As they walked, the various facilities dazzled the three apprentices. Before they knew it, they arrived at the puppet factory. Sherman immediately noticed the towering steel behemoth standing in the corner and couldn't help but widen his eyes. What is that? Amy glanced over and said, that's a steel golem. So this is a steel golem. The books Sherman and the others had read only briefly mentioned low-level golems, without going into detail about steel golems. Seeing one in person left them awestruck. It was enormous. Lady Amy, is the steel golem much stronger than the stone golem? Corey asked curiously. Of course. The combat power of a steel golem is on par with legendary knights. Upon hearing Amy's response, the three children collectively gasped, their eyes filled with astonishment. This hulking creature was as powerful as a legendary knight. They couldn't help but swallow hard, gazing at the steel golem with a newfound respect. Their admiration for Sunan deepened even further. How powerful must their teacher be to create such a formidable steel golem? Chapter 73, Tasks and Contribution Points. After leaving the puppet factory, Amy led the three apprentices to the magical plant garden, and finally, they headed straight for the warehouse. The last stop on their tour of the base was the warehouse. As they approached the warehouse, Sherman heard a melodious tune from a distance. It's a violin, Adil said, closing her eyes to listen for a moment before confirming. Yeah, Corey nodded. The player's skill is impressive, even better than my previous violin teacher. Sherman scratched his head, unable to discern the differences but agreeing it sounded nice. It's little Gree playing, meow. She loves to play the violin, Amy said, leading the way toward the warehouse. The trio suppressed their curiosity and hurried to catch up. Upon arriving at the warehouse, they discovered a small chair in front of the entrance, where a tiny figure sat, focused on playing the violin. The figure was about 20 centimeters tall, slender, and delicate, resembling a greatly diminished girl. She had slightly scaled, light green skin and deep green hair entwined with shells and pearls, wrapped in a shawl woven from various seaweeds, exuding a strange beauty. Adil's eyes lit up. So cute. Sherman hesitated, is that a fairy? You're right, Sherman, little Gree is a gremlin. She was summoned from another world by Sunan a few days ago, Amy explained. Summoned from another world? Gremlin? Sherman and the others listened, feeling both impressed and curious. Don't let her small size fool you, she has lived for many years. Gremlins are a very rare immortal race. The three apprentices gasped in astonishment. An immortal race? Did such a race really exist in this world? Just then, the melodious violin music gradually stopped, followed by a tender, pleasant voice. Amy, it's not polite to discuss a lady's age behind her back. Why not? I was just stating the truth, Amy replied, puzzled. Little Gree approached, casting a resigned glance at Amy, then turned to the three with a smile, saying, nice to meet you. I'm Gree, the new warehouse manager. Sherman and the others snapped back to reality from their astonishment and quickly introduced themselves. I know who you are, Lord Sunan has mentioned you, Gree smiled, gesturing for them to follow her to a bulletin board. Take a look at this. The three leaned in closely, noticing various tasks listed on the board. Tasks included caring for magical plants, cleaning laboratories, extracting silver moon flowers, maintaining clay golems, repairing humanoid targets, making lower-tier active potions, creating lower-tier dragon blood potions, crafting strength potions, and refining black stone leopards. Nearly 20 or 30 tasks in total. Each task included details about the location, time, prerequisites, and the contribution points to be earned upon completion. Tasks like caring for magical plants, cleaning laboratories, and maintaining clay golems offered the least contribution points, only single digits. Next were extracting silver moon flowers and repairing humanoid targets, which earned over 10 points. However, the former required a certain level of potion-making knowledge, while the latter required mastery of the zero-circle spell repair. Neither was something they could undertake at the moment. As for the subsequent tasks involving potion-making and refining black stone leopards, they were out of the question. Looking at the tasks, Adil pondered and turned to Gree, asking, "Lady Gree, can contribution points be exchanged for certain things?" "Just call me Gree." Gree nodded, confirming Adil's guess. "You're correct, contribution points can be exchanged for resources here. There's a rule among wizards, equal exchange. If you want something, you must provide something of equal value, including knowledge. The meditation methods, knowledge, and potions you received earlier were gifts from Lord Sunan as your teacher. But starting today, you must work to earn resources." Gree led the three to another bulletin board displaying various resources. From basic materials like clay, silver, blackstone iron, and silver moon flowers to various books, and larger items like super potions and lower-tier magic items, even runes and steel golems were listed. Valuable items that Sherman and the others had long known from Amy to be incredibly precious. They were all tempted by the offerings. However, upon seeing the contribution points required to exchange for a steel golem, their hearts sank, and they quickly dismissed any unrealistic thoughts. "You three are quite fortunate," Amy chimed in. "Resources are scarce on the starry continent right now. Many items listed here are impossible to find outside, only Sunan can acquire them. As long as you work hard enough, you won't have to worry about lacking resources to enhance your strength." Sherman, Corey, and Adil felt a surge of excitement from Amy's words. Over the past 6 months, through their studies and conversations with Amy, they had come to understand the importance of resources for a wizard apprentice. Without ample resources, even the growth of their mental strength through meditation would be difficult, let alone seeking the truth. Now, their teacher had provided them with a platform. A platform where they could exchange labor for resources. As long as they diligently earned contribution points, they could continuously grow stronger until one day, they became powerful like their teacher. "I'll be here in the warehouse. If you want to take on tasks, check your contribution points, or exchange for items, feel free to come and find me," Gree said. After saying that, she picked up her violin again. Seeing this, Sherman and the others tactfully bid farewell and left. On their way to the residential area, Amy continued to chatter, "Don't be fooled by little Gree's small size, her archery skills are incredible. She also knows various charm spells, detection spells, and invisibility spells. Even I am no match for her." Sherman, Corey, and Adil responded absent-mindedly, their thoughts drifting elsewhere. For the young apprentices, everything they had just seen felt so novel. Before today, they had read numerous books and believed they had a decent understanding of the world of wizards. But witnessing the facilities in the base firsthand made them feel as if they had just lifted the veil to glimpse a part of the wizarding world. Their previous assumptions had merely been the perspective of a frog at the bottom of a well. Especially for Sherman, the realization was profound. Recalling his earlier dreams of living in a castle, he couldn't help but feel a mix of self-mockery and reflection. He had once been so naive and laughable. This world was far broader than he had imagined. Compared to the vast and mysterious wizarding world, a mere noble castle was insignificant. "I must become a wizard and see more of the world." In that moment, the young apprentice silently made a firm resolution. Chapter 74, Synthesizing Faint Glow-Level Items. The magic stone lamps cast a warm glow, illuminating the entire workshop as brightly as daylight. After successfully synthesizing the magic stones, Sunan promptly replaced all the lighting fixtures in the base with magic stone lamps. Compared to torches and oil lamps, magic stone lamps provided a more stable and brighter light. They also consumed very little energy, with a single magic stone able to power the lamp for over half a year. Similarly, the alcohol lamps used for potion making were also replaced with more precise burning lamps powered by magic stones. Thanks to this upgrade, Sunan noticed an increase in his potion-making success rates by several percentage points. Under the bright light, Sunan focused intently as he examined the ring in his palm, a pleased smile on his face. After the materials he had commissioned from the Firefox Trading Company arrived, he immediately began crafting magic items. The first item was, of course, a space-type magic item. Following his plan, Sunan manufactured 7 alchemical-grade space rings in one go and combined them all together, successfully synthesizing faint glow-level space rings. Space ring, faint glow-level/low magic item, contains 5 cubic meters of storage space. Items placed inside are unaffected by the passage of time, but living beings cannot be stored within. Alchemical-grade space rings only had a capacity of 0.5 cubic meters and did not have the effect of pausing the passage of time for preservation. However, after synthesizing the faint glow-level space ring, the capacity increased to 10 times the original size, and it also gained the effect of pausing time for preservation, making it significantly stronger than the alchemical grade space ring. I won't have to keep taking things in and out of the magic cube anymore. Sunan slipped the space ring onto his finger and nodded in satisfaction. Next, I need to create attack type and defense type faint glow level magic items. Choosing a defense type magic item was easy. The compendium of low-tier magic items contained crafting methods for protective rings. Sunan could easily create a few and then synthesize them. As for the attack type magic item, after deep consideration, Sunan opted for an alchemical grade item called the Frostburst Necklace. Its effect was to unleash a shockwave of extreme cold centered around the user, dealing ice damage to a 10-meter radius and applying a freezing slow effect. It offered both damage and crowd control. A win-win situation. However, unlike the space rings, which were sufficient in number, attack type and defense type magic items were better if their power was maximized. Thus, Sunan planned to create a few more, attempting to synthesize higher-powered faint glow-level magic items. He aimed to stay just shy of the threshold required to break through to a magic artifact. After all, to control and use a magic artifact, one needed a mental power level equivalent to that of a formal wizard. In that case, I will need to synthesize quite a few items. Sunan took a deep breath and focused his energy on continuing to craft magic items. In the year 1251 of the starry calendar, just a few days after the New Year celebrations, the first batch of dragon blood fruits ripened. Sunan promptly gathered a group of soldiers to consume the dragon blood fruits and test their effects. The results were quite satisfying. The enhanced physical conditioning effect of the dragon blood fruit was roughly equivalent to 1/3 of a low-tier dragon blood potion. This level of enhancement was already impressive. After all, the monthly production of lower-tier dragon blood potions in Shimmering City was still under 20 bottles, while the dragon blood fruits could yield over 1,000 in just 3 months, translating to a monthly production equivalent to more than 100 lower-tier dragon blood potions. The yield had increased by more than 5 times. This production level was more than enough to supply the current military forces of Shimmering City. Even if Shimmering City expanded its military in the future, it wouldn't be a problem since the yield of dragon blood fruits could keep increasing as long as the planting scale was expanded. However, the prerequisite for this was to have enough apprentices to tend to the cultivation. That issue would require time to resolve. While the level 1 summon monster spell could increase the number of helpers, the unpredictability was too high. After attempting several hundred times, he had finally summoned Gree, who was a perfect fit. Relying on this method to find enough helpers would also take a long time. The key is to attract them to stay. Gree was an immortal race, her long life provided her ample time and interest to experience everything that piqued her curiosity. Thus, when Sunan summoned her and offered the position of warehouse manager, she immediately showed genuine interest and agreed without much hesitation. Her compensation was modest, only 3 magic stones per month. According to Gree, witnessing the growth of a group of young wizard apprentices was quite an interesting endeavor. Sunan suspected that young wizard apprentices included not just Sherman and the others but likely himself as well. In addition to the dragon blood fruits, the cultivation of silver moon flowers was also very promising. Since they had been planted early on, the silver moon flowers had already been harvested twice. The essence extracted from the improved silver moon flowers had significantly enhanced effects compared to before, greatly reducing the cost of synthesizing super potions. Because of this, Sunan was able to provide excess lower-tier active potions to the 3 apprentices. After assigning the tasks of caring for magical plants and extracting the essence of silver moon flowers to the 3 little ones, Sunan found himself considerably relieved, freeing up more time for other work. Notably, just recently, all 3 apprentices had successfully constructed their first star rings. Sherman was the fastest, taking just over 7 months. A significant portion of that success was attributed to the lower-tier active potions. Sunan himself had only used silver moon flower essence when he first entered the star ring meditation method, and its effects were far inferior to those of the lower-tier active potions. In comparison, the 3 little ones were undoubtedly luckier, having potion assistance from the beginning of their training. However, during his own training, Sunan had constructed his first star ring in just 6 months. From this perspective, the 3 little ones' aptitudes were not as high as his. The second to construct a star ring was Corey, taking nearly 8 months, just a week or so behind Sherman. Lastly, Adil took around 9 months. After successfully forming their first star rings, the 3 apprentices had now begun learning zero circle spells. However, Sunan estimated that it might take them about half a year to master their first spell. This was still under the benefit of the lower-tier active potion. After all, they didn't have a panel or other shortcuts to rapidly learn spells. Recalling the panel, Sunan took a quick glance at it. His star ring meditation method had now risen to level 9, and he had constructed 8 star rings, with just one left to go. As he had suspected, the proficiency required to upgrade the 9th level star ring meditation method had skyrocketed to 200,000. Based on his calculations, it would take at least another 6 months to break through. His mental power stood at 23.88. Once he constructed the 9th star ring, it would likely increase to around 25. The higher I go, the harder it is to increase my mental power. To quickly advance to a level 3 wizard apprentice, I really need to rely on the nightmare potion. Chapter 75, Spread of the Disaster. Is this the dragon blood fruit? He gazed at the baskets overflowing with red fruits, his eyes nearly sparkling with excitement. Does this really have effects equivalent to 1/3 of a lower-tier dragon blood potion? Sunan smiled slightly. Would you like to have someone try it? No need, you and I both know it's effective, he chuckled heartily. He wasn't questioning Sunan's integrity, he was simply too exhilarated. The supply of lower-tier dragon blood potions had not kept pace with the rapid expansion of the Blackstone cavalry, significantly slowing their growth. Even with the entire territory's support, the Blackstone cavalry currently numbered only around 300, with knights comprising about 2/3 of that number. They were still quite far from Ki's goal of forming a fully knighted army. He had been dreaming of Sunan producing a substitute for the lower-tier dragon blood potions sooner. Fortunately, this issue had finally been resolved. With this batch of dragon blood fruits, the stagnated Blackstone cavalry could finally accelerate its expansion once again. Standing behind Ki, Bread, Jodin, and Stolly shared the same joy. They all understood what the dragon blood fruits represented. With this, the military strength of the Shimmering Territory could experience another wave of rapid expansion. By the way, here, take this. Sunan tossed a dragon blood fruit to Ki. Ki instinctively reached out to catch it, puzzled. What is this? This is a specially crafted dragon blood fruit. After consuming it, you should be able to break through and advance to intermediate knight status, Sunan explained. In fact, this was a synthesized dragon blood fruit made from over 100 dragon blood fruits. If converted into lower-tier dragon blood potions, it would be equivalent to about 3 or 4 high-quality potions. Upon hearing Sunan's words, Ki's spirit lifted. He carefully stored the dragon blood fruit, preparing to find a suitable moment to consume it later. Such a valuable item should not be wasted recklessly. It was best to practice the breathing technique immediately after consumption to achieve optimal absorption. Regaining his composure, Ki smiled and said, I've already issued a decree. From now on, all children over the age of 12 in the territory will undergo talent evaluations. Those with wizard apprentice potential will be sent to the base for your training. After a pause, Ki hesitated before adding, could you lower the standards for selecting wizard apprentices? It was simply too few to have only 3 wizard apprentices emerge from such a large territory. Sunan shook his head. The minimum requirement is the ability to read introductory books. He wished he could select more apprentices as well. However, the standards were rigid, and he felt helpless. Those without wizard potential could do nothing beneficial at the base, they could only perform menial tasks, which the clay golems were already handling. Ultimately, the selection and training of wizard apprentices was a lengthy process that could not be rushed. Given the current population of the Shimmering Territory, having a qualified apprentice emerge every 2 or 3 years would be quite impressive. Unless the territory significantly expanded to acquire more land and population, there would be no notable increase in the number of apprentices in the short term. Listening to their conversation, Jodin couldn't help but glance at Stolly, sighing as he quietly remarked, I really envy Kori's position as Lord Sunan's student. Why can't my boy have that kind of talent? Mentioning his son made Stolly's usually serious expression break into a proud smile. He felt immense joy when his son was identified as having wizard potential. If his son could become a powerful wizard like Sunan, the McKinney family might thrive and grow into a true noble lineage. Seeing Stolly's contentment, Jodin felt a pang of jealousy, contemplating whether he should have more children. My youngest will turn 12 next year, I'll let him participate in the evaluations, Bread said, looking hopeful. With Stolly's son as an example, all the knights in the Shimmering Territory were eager for their children to become wizards. Ki, oblivious to the whispers of his 3 subordinates, shifted the conversation back to another topic. The situation in the Frostflower province is worsening. It's not just Silver Ridge City, beastization syndrome has begun to spread to other towns. Sunan was taken aback. Didn't the Marquis of Frostflower dispatch troops to suppress it? I've heard that during the suppression, several dozen knights in the army were infected, which caused the situation to deteriorate rapidly. The troops sent to suppress the outbreak suffered heavy losses. I suspect the Marquis of Frostflower is overwhelmed right now. Sunan's lips twitched slightly. Beastization syndrome typically came at the cost of complete loss of rationality, resulting in a power surge, akin to a permanent state of rage. If knights were infected, it was normal for their combat power to rise by 1 or 2 small ranks. If peak knights were infected, their battle strength could even soar to rival that of intermediate knights. Dozens of infected knights would be enough to challenge a fully armed cavalry regiment of 1,000 soldiers. Just the thought of it was headache-inducing. He couldn't help but wonder how the commander in charge of the suppression had allowed the situation to escalate to this point. Seeing Sunan's confusion, he continued, "The commander in charge of the suppression has been dismissed by the Marquis of Frostflower. The new commander is Lord Yorn, a seasoned general who has fought alongside the Marquis for many years and is also a legendary knight. With him in charge, the beastization disaster should be suppressed quickly." He spoke with confidence. After all, legendary knights were the pinnacle of power in the Principality of Starlight. With such a powerful figure involved, suppressing a group of irrational infected individuals should be a straightforward task. In fact, all the nobles aware of the situation shared similar thoughts. However, the unfolding circumstances took everyone by surprise. In the year 1251 of the starry calendar, during the month of spring dawn, March, legendary knight Yorn was besieged by thousands of infected individuals in Yulan City, ultimately succumbing after a fierce battle. The elite cavalry regiment accompanying him was annihilated. When the news broke, it sent shockwaves throughout the Principality of Starlight, drawing the attention of countless nobles to the Frostflower province. In the following month, during the month of thunder, April, the beastization disaster spread at an astonishing rate. Throughout the Frostflower province, nearly every town was afflicted with beastization syndrome, except for the central city of Frostflower City. The origin of the disaster, Silver Ridge City, had been reduced to ruins. Neighboring Hulun Province, Red Leaf Province, and White Tower Province quickly established border checkpoints to prevent citizens from the Frostflower Province from entering their territories. Later that month, the Marquis of Frostflower requested assistance from the capital, seeking reinforcements. In the following month, the Grand Duke of Starlight sent troops to the Frostflower province to begin suppressing the infected individuals. In an instant, the entire Principality of Starlight seemed enveloped in an air of uncertainty and impending turmoil.